Welcome to a cozy crime story. Tonight, we are diving into 3 hours of gripping true crime. Real stories of mysteries, betrayal, and cold-blooded crime, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's a perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now, settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. The wind rose before she did. It rushed across the high ridge of Garnet Valley like a warning, sharp and cold as if the land itself sensed what was about to happen. 16-year-old Lou Strike felt the ground shift beneath her heel, the loose gravel rolling like tiny marbles under her shoes. She reached for balance, for breath, for something solid to hold on to. But there was nothing. Her father's hands had been the last thing she felt, hands that once steadied a bicycle for her, hands that once brushed dirt off her scraped knees, hands that trembled now, not with rage, but with a fear so blinding it swallowed every ounce of reason he had left. A soft gasp escaped her lips as her body tilted backward, weightless for a split second before gravity claimed her. The edge disappeared from under her feet. The ridge thinned into a distant line above her, shrinking as she dropped. Wind clawed at her clothes. Her hair whipped across her face. Branches scraped her arms as she struck a cluster of brush on the way down. Each snap echoed like a warning shot. Dust plumed behind her as her world turned sideways, then upside down, then into something she could no longer name. And in that terrifying descent, she felt something far deeper than physical fear. She felt the sting of betrayal, not the kind whispered about in broken friendships or strained relationships. This was the kind that cracks the soul, when the one who promised protection becomes the one who takes it away. Above her, Garnet Valley's rust-red cliffs stood silent, as if stunned by what they had just witnessed. Below her, the canyon opened wide, ready to swallow the girl who had fought so hard to choose her own future. But even as she fell, clutching instinctively at the small swell of life beneath her ribs, something inside her refused to give up. Her heart hammered in her chest, a fierce reminder of the promise she made the moment she discovered she was pregnant. I will protect you, no matter the cost. That vow echoed louder than the rushing wind, because Lou hadn't been reckless. She hadn't been rebelling. She wasn't running from responsibility or hiding from reality. She was simply trying to make a choice about her own life, a choice her father, Alva Luetgen, felt determined to erase. And that raises a question many people never expect to ask themselves. What would you do if the person meant to keep you safe became the person you feared most? Would you plead for understanding from someone who no longer seemed capable of hearing you? Or would you stand your ground like Lou did, even when it meant risking everything? Some choices shape a life, others test the foundation of who we are. And sometimes, the most life-changing moment comes when we stand on the thin edge between who we've been and who we're about to become. Ask yourself this. Have you ever stood on the edge of a decision that changed everything? A moment when you knew that once you stepped forward, your world would never return to what it was. For Lou, that moment didn't happen in a calm room or during a quiet conversation. It happened with the roar of the canyon beneath her feet and the tremble of her father's hands pushing her toward an impossible fate. She wasn't choosing danger. She wasn't choosing chaos. She was choosing her child, her future, her right to decide. But Alva, drowning in memories of everything he had lost and everything he feared she would lose, couldn't see that. His terror reshaped itself into something he mistook for control, and in one irreversible moment, that fear drove him to do the unthinkable. Yet this story isn't just about a fall. It's about what happened after, how a girl survived a drop that should have ended her life, how a town was forced to confront the cost of silence and the weight of misunderstood intentions, and how a father faced the truth of his actions, stripped of excuses and left with nothing but consequences he never imagined he would have to bear. Because survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's about grace, timing, and a thread of hope that refuses to break, even when everything else does. So how did someone survive a fall like that? How does a father come to terms with the moment his fear turned into harm? How does a community learn that light can rise from a place that once felt swallowed in darkness? Those answers form the heart of this story, a story that begins at the edge of a ridge but does not end there. Before we go deeper, I want to welcome you. If you're new here, I'm grateful you're joining us today. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the stories we share. Stories that challenge, inspire, remind us that even in the hardest moments, there is something worth holding on to. And as you listen, I want you to think about one question. If you were in Lou Strike's place, pregnant, terrified, and determined, what choice would you have made? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Now, let's begin. The farmhouse sat alone on the far edge of Garnet Valley, a place where the fields carried long shadows by late afternoon, and the fence posts leaned slightly, the way old things sometimes do when they've weathered more storms than they were built for. It had once been a warm home. People remembered that. They remembered the smoke curling from the chimney during winter mornings. They remembered the soft glow from the single porch light that stayed on until the last neighbor made it home. And they remembered Alva Lewitkin as a man who used to wave from that porch with a grin so wide it could steady a person on their worst day. But those memories belonged to a different time. Inside the house now, the air held something unspoken, an ache that seemed to cling to the old wooden floorboards, the scuffed furniture, the framed photographs that still hung crooked on the walls. Alva walked past those photographs without looking at them. He didn't need to. He had memorized every inch of his wife's face long before he lost her, and remembering her wasn't comfort anymore. It was a reminder of what was missing. His daughter, Lou Strike, had her mother's eyes, clear, bright, and steady, like they could see through storms other people couldn't name. When she was little, those eyes used to bring him joy. Now they frightened him. They made him feel like she was slipping away, one decision at a time. Lewis stood in the narrow kitchen doorway that afternoon, fingers rubbing lightly at a chipped plate she'd been washing. Sunlight pushed through the window behind her, catching the faint dust in the air and settling on her hair like a soft crown. She looked calm on the outside, but inside she felt the weight of something she hadn't wanted to tell him, something she knew would break open everything he'd been holding together with frayed rope and sheer willpower. When she finally whispered the truth to him the night before, "Dad, I'm pregnant," the kitchen felt too small to hold his reaction. Today, the silence between them felt just as tight. Alva stood with both hands braced on the table, his shoulders rigid, his jaw flexed as he fought for words that refused to come out clean. To anyone watching, he might have seemed angry. He wasn't. Anger was easier to understand. What lived inside him now was harder. Fear that pressed against his ribs, fear that made the world narrow into one sharp point he couldn't avoid. He turned slowly, his voice low and uneven. "You're 16, Lou." "I know," she said softly. "You're a child." Her grip tightened around the plate, but her voice stayed steady. "I'm going to be a mother." The sentence fell between them like a stone, heavy, certain, irreversible. For a moment, Alva closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something behind them had dimmed. "You aren't ready," he said. "You don't understand what life can do to you. You don't understand how fast it takes things away." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The strain in it was enough. Lou set the plate aside, wiped her hands on her jeans, and stepped forward. She didn't try to touch him. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the slightest act of comfort broke him more than silence did. Instead, she spoke with the kind of gentleness that made her seem older than her years. "I know it's scary, but I'm not alone. Harvey is here." The moment the name left her mouth, Alva's expression sharpened. "Harvey," he repeated sharply, as though the boy's name itself were an accusation. "That boy doesn't know what responsibility is. He doesn't know what raising a child means. Neither of you do." Lou swallowed. She expected this part. "He's not running," she said. "He wants to help." Alva stepped toward her, a bitter laugh slipping out. "Help?" He'll say that now. But when real life hits, when bills stack up, when nights get long, when things fall apart, he won't know what to do, and you'll be trapped. His voice caught, just like your mother was. Louie's breath stilled. She had never heard him speak so plainly about the past. Not like this, that's not fair, she whispered. It's the truth. No, she said quietly but firmly. It's your fear. He stiffened as if she had struck him. For a moment, he simply stared at her, something pained rising in his eyes. Alva wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by the one person he had tried for years to protect by holding everything around her tightly, too tightly. I can't. He stopped, pressed his hand to his forehead. Lou, I can't let you throw away your future. You have school. You have dreams. His voice trembled. You have a chance to build a life without the hardship your mother suffered. I'm not throwing anything away. You are, he insisted louder now. You just don't see it yet. Lou felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew tears would only make him think she doubted herself. And she didn't. She placed a hand on her stomach, a gesture she often made without realizing it. I want this baby, she said. I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it. But now that it's real, I can't end it. Alva's face hardened. His breath came short and shallow. You can, he said, and you should. No, the word wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. Alva stepped back as if the refusal landed physically. He turned away, fingers digging into his hair. Lou watched him struggle, watched fear twist into frustration, watched a man who had been broken once begin to break again in a completely different way. Lou, he said tightly, I'm begging you to think, to see what this will do to you. I have thought. He slammed his hand on the counter. Not violently, but with the kind of force that meant the pressure inside him was becoming too much to hide. You're 16, he shouted. 16. You don't know what you're choosing. Lou's voice didn't rise in return. I know more than you think, and you're wrong, he said through clenched teeth. She met his gaze without flinching. Then let me be wrong. Let me learn. Let me live my life without you trying to choose it for me. The room went still. Outside, a crow called in the distance. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background. Every sound seemed louder when neither of them spoke. Finally, Alva stepped back, breathing harshly. I can't do this, he muttered. I can't watch you destroy your future. I can't watch you make the same mistakes.
This isn't a mistake, she interrupted.
He stared at her. His chest rose and fell unevenly. His eyes glistened, but with what emotion she couldn't tell. You have no idea, he whispered, how fragile life is. Then let me protect the one I'm carrying. Her words landed deep, cutting through layers of fear he didn't know how to separate from love. For the first time, Alva had no reply. Lou waited, 1 second, 2, 10, but he didn't speak again. He only looked at her as though the child she once was and the young woman she was becoming stood in front of him at the same time, and he didn't know which one to reach for. And in that moment, she understood something clearly. Whatever her father was becoming, whatever he feared, whatever choices he made from here on out, he was losing his grip on the control he had used as a shield for years. And that loss terrified him more than anything else. The next few days inside the farmhouse felt like walking through thick fog, soundless, heavy, impossible to escape. Nothing broke the tension except the creak of the old floorboards and the quiet clatter of dishes when Lou tried to keep busy. The house had seen arguments before, but never like this. Never with stakes this high. Alva moved through each room like a man pacing the edge of something he couldn't name. He woke up earlier, went to bed later, and barely looked at his daughter. Every time he passed her in the narrow hallway, his shoulders stiffened, as though he couldn't bear being close to someone he was terrified of losing control over. Lou felt every inch of that distance. She tried to speak to him twice. Both times ended the same. Dad, can we just talk? Not now, Dad, please. I said not now. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't slamming fists. But the tightness in his voice was worse. It meant his fear had grown quiet. Quiet fear was the kind that changed people. Lou tried to stay patient. She tried to give him time to collect himself the way her mother used to do when grief overwhelmed, in the early years after her passing. But patience could only hold so much weight. She knew the truth had cracked something in him, something he had kept sealed for too long. On the fourth evening, as the sun dropped behind the valley ridge, she came into the kitchen to make tea. The house was dim. The only light came from a small lamp on the counter. Alva sat at the table, elbows braced, staring at an empty cup like it held answers. She hesitated at the doorway. "Dad?" He didn't look up. She stepped closer. "Please talk to me." His jaw tightened. "You already made your choice. I want us to talk about it." "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "You made a decision that will destroy your future. And you expect me to smile and pretend it's fine?" Lou set her cup down, holding it with both hands. "I don't expect you to pretend anything. I just want you to understand." That was the wrong word. Alva's head snapped up. "Understand," he repeated. "You think I don't understand what you're doing to yourself?" Lou swallowed. "I know you're scared. That is not the word," he said sharply. "It's called being realistic. You don't see what I've seen. You don't know how quickly life turns. You don't know how easily hope gets ripped away." "I'm not Mom," she whispered. He froze. A breath left him, slow, fragile, unsteady. "No," he said quietly, "you're not. But you're walking into the same kind of hardship she did, and I won't let that happen again." His voice shook in a way that told Lou this wasn't just about the pregnancy. It was about every fear he had buried since the day his wife died. "Dad," she said gently, "you're trying to fix a past you couldn't control. But this is my life, not hers, not yours." He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "Your life? Do you think your choices don't land on me too? Do you think raising a baby won't fall on my shoulders when that boy walks out?" "He won't," Lou said firmly. "You don't know that. You're 16, he snapped. 16, Lou. You barely know how the world works, and you're trusting your entire future to a boy who says sweet things in the grass behind someone's house." Lou's throat tightened, but she held her ground. "Harvey isn't going to leave. He believes in us. And he believes in this baby." Alva laughed, not amused, not angry, but wounded. "You're a child with a child's faith. You think love is enough to hold a future together." "No," she said. "I think commitment is, and Harvey has that." "Words," he said coldly. "Empty promises from someone who doesn't know what responsibility means." Lou stared at him. "Is that what you think of?" "Me too. That I'm just repeating pretty phrases because they make me feel strong?" He didn't answer. "Say it," she whispered. "Say you think I'm stupid." His mouth opened, then closed. His hands curled at his sides. "I never said that." "You don't have to," she said. "I can hear it." Alva turned away, breathing heavily. Louie's heart cracked at the sight. She didn't want to fight him. She didn't want anger. She wanted the father who used to hum while grilling on Sundays. The father who used to carry her on his shoulders during fairs. The father who cried in private after losing his wife but came out every morning and made breakfast anyway, like the world hadn't fallen apart. But that man had been buried under years of fear. "Dad," she said softly, "this isn't the end of my life. It's the beginning of something new." "No," he whispered, voice trembling. "It's the beginning of ruin." Lou stepped forward. "You're wrong. I'm not." He slammed a hand onto the counter, not to intimidate her, but because his panic had nowhere else to go. "You don't understand how quickly everything can fall apart. One wrong choice and you are trapped. Do you hear me? Trapped in a life you cannot escape." "I won't be trapped. You'll be stuck," he shouted. "Stuck like your mother was, working herself to exhaustion, sacrificing everything, dying young because her body had nothing left to give. You think I don't remember? You think I don't wake up every night hearing her struggle to breathe?" Lou's breath caught. He had never said that out loud, not once. Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't wipe them. He let them fall, streaking down a face worn by more hurt than he had ever admitted to anyone. "You're the only thing I have left," he whispered. "The only thing. And you are choosing something that could take you from me. I can't lose you. I can't." Lou took a step toward him, her own eyes burning. "Then trust me, please. Trust that I'm strong enough to build a life. Trust that I'm not her. Trust that I will make choices carefully. I can't. Why? Because the world doesn't care how careful you are, he said. It takes things anyway. Lou exhaled shakily. Then let me face it. Let me learn. Let me grow. Let me stand on my own feet. He shook his head almost violently. I won't let you go down this path. You don't get to decide, she said, voice trembling but firm. Not this. That final line hit him hard. Alva lowered into a chair, almost collapsing under the weight of it. His hands shook as he pressed them to his forehead. He looked smaller somehow, like a man cornered by emotions he couldn't contain. I can't do this, Lou, he murmured. I can't watch you throw everything away. I'm not throwing anything away, she whispered. I'm choosing a life, a real life, one that matters. Silence settled again, deep, suffocating, final. And in that silence, Lou understood exactly where her father stood. He wasn't going to support. He wasn't going to accept her decision. He wasn't going to soften. Not now, not soon, maybe not ever. Something inside him had crossed a line, something he couldn't pull back from. And Lou felt a chill run through her, even though the room was warm. Her father loved her, but he was about to let fear drive him into a place where love no longer looked like care, only control. And that control was reaching its breaking point. The meadow behind Harvey Darby's grandmother's house had always been a quiet place, long before Lou ever needed refuge, before her father's fear had begun twisting their home into something tight and suffocating. The meadow had been her retreat. It was a simple stretch of land, sunlit grass, an old oak tree, and the gentle hum of crickets in late afternoon. Nothing grand, nothing remarkable. But sometimes the quietest places are the ones that hold the strongest sense of safety. Lou walked there now, breathing in the warm air as she brushed her fingertips along the tops of the tall grass. She had texted Harvey earlier, asking if they could talk. He said yes before she even hit send. She knew he would. He always did. When she reached the oak tree, Harvey was already there, leaning against the trunk with his hands in his pockets. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening from worry to relief. You okay? He asked. She nodded, though her eyes said otherwise. He opened his arms, not rushing her, but offering that familiar space where her heartbeat could slow. Lou stepped into him, resting her head against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her. The tension she'd carried all morning released in a slow exhale. Rough day? He murmured. More like a rough week. He rested his chin lightly on her head. Your dad? Lou hesitated before answering. He won't talk to me without getting upset. I think he's just scared. Harvey didn't say I told you or I knew it. He wasn't that kind of person. Instead, he gently stroked her back with the side of his thumb. You don't have to explain anything, just sit with me. They settled under the oak tree, the bark warm from the sun. Lou pulled her knees to her chest, and Harvey stretched his legs out, plucking a leaf and twirling it between his fingers. For a while they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was soft, like a place to rest. Finally, Harvey broke the quiet. When you texted, I knew something was wrong. Lou traced a line in the dirt with her fingertip. He wants me to end the pregnancy. Harvey's jaw tightened slightly. I guessed he might push that. He thinks I'm too young. He thinks you and I don't know what we're doing. Harvey let out a slow breath. Maybe we don't know everything. Maybe no one does. But that doesn't mean we can't figure it out. Lou glanced up at him. You're not scared? He laughed softly. Of course I'm scared, but that doesn't mean I'm running. She looked at him longer this time, searching for any sign of hesitation. She found none. You're sure? She whispered. Harvey leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Absolutely sure. I told you before, this isn't something I'll leave you to handle alone. I'm here. I'm staying. Those words warmed her more deeply than the sunlight. Harvey wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't make grand speeches. He just showed up, again and again, in the quiet moments when she needed it most. He had a steadiness about him that made Lou feel seen, not judged, supported, not pushed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He keeps saying I'm making the same choices my mom did. Harvey's eyes lowered. He knew how much Lou's mother's memory shaped her father's emotions. "You're not her, and I'm not your dad." Lou gave a tired smile. "I know. Do you?" he asked gently. "Because you look like you're carrying the weight of both their stories." She didn't answer right away. A swallow moved quietly down her throat. "It feels like he's fighting a shadow," she said. "Not me." Harvey reached out and rested his hand on top of hers. "He's hurting. He doesn't know how to deal with it except by pulling you close, too close. He thinks if he can control everything, nothing can go wrong. Except everything's already going wrong." He squeezed her hand lightly. "Not everything." She looked at him. "No?" He shook his head. "Not this." He placed her hand gently on her belly. "Not the baby. Not us." Lou blinked hard when her eyes began to fill. She didn't break into sobs or crumble against him. She simply breathed, slow and shaky, holding on to the steady comfort of his presence. Harvey nudged her lightly. "Want to talk about something good for a minute?" She gave a small laugh. "Like what? Like baby names? Or maybe what color we'll paint the room? Or how we'll survive if she only sleeps an hour at a time?" "She," Lou repeated, eyes widening. "You think it's a girl?" "I don't know," he said with a shrug. "But I like the idea." Lou's heart warmed. "A girl. She'd be stubborn," Harvey said playfully. "Just like you, I'm not stubborn." He raised his eyebrows, amused. "You're definitely stubborn." She nudged him with her shoulder. "Fine, maybe a little." Harvey grinned. "Whatever happens, we're going to make this work, even if it's 3 a.m. and she's screaming and we're exhausted and we can't remember the last time we ate something that wasn't microwaved." Lou laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. Harvey watched her with quiet satisfaction, like seeing even a small bit of joy return to her face made his entire day. "That's better," he said. "I needed that," she admitted. He shifted closer, brushing the back of his knuckles along her cheek. "You don't have to carry all this alone. I want to be part of it. I want to be there for every appointment, every decision, every moment." Her voice softened. "You mean that with everything I have?" She leaned into his touch. Harvey's presence didn't make the situation easy, but it made it bearable. It made her feel grounded instead of overwhelmed, loved instead of judged. After a moment, he rested his forehead against hers. "We're in this together, Lou. Your dad can think what he wants. People in town can gossip all they want, but none of that changes the fact that this baby is ours, and we'll protect them." Lou closed her eyes. "Thank you." "Hey," he tilted her chin upward. "Don't thank me. Being here for you is something I want, not something I'm doing out of obligation." She swallowed, emotion thick in her chest. "He's never going to approve. I know. He might never come around. I know. And you're okay with that?" Harvey let out a long breath. "I don't want to be the reason your family breaks apart, but I also won't let fear dictate our lives. If he needs time, he'll get time. If he never changes, we'll handle that too. But I'm not going anywhere." Lou rested her hand on his. "I want you here. I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving." For the first time since she told her father about the pregnancy, Lou felt her heartbeat steady. The weight in her chest loosened. She didn't know what the coming months would hold, but she knew she wouldn't face them alone. Harvey shifted and leaned back against the oak tree, pulling Lou gently with him until her head rested on his chest. His arms wrapped around her comfortably, protectively. "You know what I think?" he said after a moment. "What?" "I think you're going to be a great mom." A small smile tugged at her lips. "How do you know?" "Because you already care so much," he said. "Because you're strong, because you're thoughtful, and because you're already fighting for this baby." Lou closed her eyes. "I hope I can be." "You will be," he assured her. "I'd bet everything on that." The sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow through the grass. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead. Lou breathed it in, letting the calmness settle inside her like a balm. In this quiet meadow, under this old tree, the world didn't feel so heavy. Her father's fear didn't feel so suffocating. The future didn't seem so impossible. Here she felt hope, real, gentle, steady hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be challenges, arguments, moments of doubt, but there would also be love, support, commitment. There would be Harvey's arms around her, reminding her she wasn't facing any of this in the dark. and that mattered more than anything. Lou didn't know what her father would do next. She didn't know how far his fear might push him. But she knew this. She had someone who believed in her, someone who would stand beside her, someone who didn't run when things got difficult. That kind of presence could change everything. And for a while longer they sat beneath the oak tree in complete silence, not because they had nothing left to say, but because they finally felt safe enough not to speak at all. The morning began quietly, the way moments often do before they rupture into something unforgettable. Lou woke to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, its steady rhythm moving the warm air around her small bedroom. She stared at the pale blue paint on her walls, a color she and her mother had chosen years ago. Back then, the room had felt full of promise. Now, it felt like a place holding its breath. She dressed slowly, tying her hair into a loose braid as sunlight filtered through her curtains. For a moment, she allowed herself a brief sense of calm. The previous night had been exhausting. Hours of tension with her father, followed by a quiet escape to the meadow, where Harvey helped her breathe again. But today felt different. She didn't know why. She couldn't name it. Something in the air felt too still. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw her father at the table, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold. His hands were wrapped tightly around the mug, as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored. "Morning," she said softly. He didn't respond right away. His eyes were fixed on the dark surface of the drink. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. Her pulse quickened. She took a careful seat across from him. "About what?" "About us," he said. "About everything." She swallowed. "I've been trying to talk. You keep shutting me out." He looked down again. "I know." Lou waited. The quiet stretched, long and uncomfortable. Finally, he pushed the chair back and stood. "Come on, let's go for a drive. Somewhere quiet." Something about his tone made her uneasy. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. It was calm in a way that didn't feel like peace. More like a person who'd reached the end of every thought and made a decision they hadn't fully processed. "Where?" Lou asked. "You'll see," he said. "Grab your jacket." She hesitated at the doorway. Something deep in her chest urged her to question him, to resist, to press for more detail. But a fragile part of her wanted to believe he was trying, finally trying, to mend the distance between them. Maybe this was his way of opening a door. Maybe he wanted to find a middle ground. Maybe this was the beginning of healing. She chose hope. She grabbed her jacket. The drive was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the taut kind, like a rope pulled so tight it might snap. The sun dipped low in the sky as they traveled down the narrow, winding road leading out of town. The horizon glowed orange, painting the valley in long, soft shadows. Lou watched the passing fields through the window, pressing her hand against her abdomen, as though protecting the small life inside from something she couldn't yet articulate. After 20 minutes, the landscape began to change. Lou's breath hitched. "Dad, where are we going?" "We just need space," he said. To talk without interruptions. The truck climbed steadily until the road opened onto a rocky overlook. The ridge, Garnet Valley, stretched endlessly below, a sweeping, rugged scene that towered above the canyon. Lou had come here many times as a child, drawn by the vast view and the wind that always seemed to hold unspoken stories. But today, the ridge looked different. Unsteady, too open, too close to danger. Alva parked near the edge. When he stepped out, he moved slowly, as though fighting something inside himself with each step. Lou unbuckled, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "Dad, why here?" He didn't answer. He opened the door, stepped into the dry wind, and closed it behind him. Lou followed reluctantly. The air felt colder than it should have been. Sand and dust lifted around her feet, drawn upward by the gusts that swept across the ridge. Alva stood near the edge, staring out over the vast drop. His shoulders rose and fell with sharp breaths. "We need to talk," he said again. Lou approached carefully. "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" He turned to face her. His eyes were red and glassy, like a man who had been crying long before she got up. For a moment, she saw a glimpse of the father she loved, the man who used to carry her on his shoulders, who used to kiss her forehead goodnight, who used to whisper, "You're safe with me." but that glimpse vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I'm trying," he said, voice trembling. "I really am, but I can't accept what you're choosing." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm not asking you to like it." "I know," he said. "You're asking me to live with it, and I can't." "Dad, please," she said, stepping closer. "I love you. I want you in my life, but I can't end this pregnancy. I won't." He shook his head, pacing back and forth near the edge. His breath came in uneven bursts. "You don't understand what this will do to you," he said. "You're just a kid. You don't know how harsh life can be. You don't know how fast dreams disappear. You don't know what it's like to carry a weight you can't put down." "I'll learn," she whispered. He stopped pacing, staring at her with eyes full of anguish. "And what happens when you fail? When everything collapses? When you're stuck in suffering and there's no one to save you?" "I won't fail," she said. "I'll do my best. I'll work hard. And Harvey can't protect you," he snapped. "He's a boy. He doesn't know anything about sacrifice. He knows enough to stay," she said firmly. "He knows enough to care." Alva's voice cracked. "He'll leave. They always leave." Lou's heart twisted. "Dad, that's not true." He stepped forward, desperation shining through every line of his face. "I'm trying to keep you safe. I'm trying to stop you from ruining your life. Why can't you see that?" "Because you're not saving me," she said softly. "You're hurting me. You're so afraid of losing me," she continued, "that you're pushing me away. You're letting your fear decide everything, even who I get to become." Alva's eyes filled, tears spilling over. He wiped them harshly. "I can't lose another person I love. I can't." "You're not losing me," she whispered. He shook his head violently. "I already am." He paced again, closer to the drop now. Too close. "Dad?" Lou's voice quivered. "Step back, please. I can't let this happen," he said, more to himself than to her. "I can't let you destroy your future. I can't watch you go through what your mother did. I can't stand by while you walk into the same pain." "I'm not her," Lou insisted. "I'm me, and this is my baby." The wind whipped between them. A hawk circled far above, its cry echoing faintly. Alva's breathing grew uneven. He covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking. "I'm losing control," he whispered. "I don't know how to stop it." Lou stepped closer carefully, gently. "Dad, look at me." He lowered his hands. The despair in his eyes was raw. "It's already too late," he said. "What do you mean?" "I can't let this happen," he said, voice breaking. "I can't let you throw everything away. I won't." Lou felt a chill run through her, a warning she couldn't ignore. "Dad, what are you doing?" He stepped toward her, hands trembling. Not raised in anger, not clenched in fury, but reaching with the frantic desperation of a drowning man grabbing at anything within reach. "Dad, you're scaring me," she said, backing up instinctively. "I'm saving you," he said. She opened her mouth to protest, but he reached her first, his palms pressed against her shoulders, not hard, but firmly enough that her foot slipped on the loose rocks at the ridge's edge. "Dad, no!" Her cry cut off as her heel lost grip. The earth tipped, her stomach lurched, the sky tilted, the wind roared past her ears. She reached out, for him, for anything, but she only felt empty air. The ridge shrank above her as she fell, her father's horrified shout echoing through the canyon. Her arms flailed, her body spun, her breath ripped from her chest. Branches scraped her skin, a rock struck her side. She hit a patch of brush that slowed her fall, then darkness swallowed her. It happened in seconds, but those seconds changed everything. When consciousness returned, it did not come gently. It seeped into Lou's mind like cold water filling a cracked glass, slow and painful. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath hitched, and the world around her tilted in and out of focus. At first, she didn't remember the fall. Her body felt foreign, heavy, bruised in places she couldn't name. The scent of soil and broken branches hit her first, damp, earthy, sharp. A faint groan escaped her lips. Then the pain arrived. It spread through her ribs, her arms, her hips, a throbbing pulse of ache that made her gasp. She tried to push herself upright, but her muscles protested violently. She sank back against the mound of crushed brush beneath her. Her heart pounded chaotically in her chest. Where am I? Her vision swam, shapes spinning and blending before settling into clarity. She saw jagged rock walls rising several yards above her, shadows stretching across the ledge where she lay. Above that, farther up out of sight, the ridge waited, silent and unforgiving. And then it hit her, the fall. Her father's trembling hands, the shift of gravel under her shoes, the sudden drop, the wind screaming past her. Her breath hitched. She tried to inhale too quickly and pain stabbed her ribs. Fear struck her chest so sharply she thought she'd pass out again. Her hands flew to her stomach. No, 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 she whispered, voice trembling. Her fingers pressed tremblingly against the small curve beneath her shirt. Her heart hammered. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the terror of stillness, of nothing. But then, a sensation, faint, soft, steady, a flutter, a quiet reminder of life, a heartbeat, a tiny, stubborn heartbeat that refused to give up. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. They blurred her vision, sliding down her temples into her hair. You're okay, she whispered, breath shaking. You're okay. Thank you. Thank you. She cradled her belly with both arms, her body curling instinctively around the fragile life inside her. The relief was overwhelming, so intense it hurt almost as much as the bruises scattered across her skin. She wasn't sure how long she lay there, crying softly into the dirt, holding her stomach as if shielding her child from the memory of the fall. Her limbs trembled, but the trembling wasn't just from pain. It was from gratitude, shock, and the haunting realization of how close she had come to losing everything. When her breathing finally steadied, she forced herself to listen. Wind rustled through the canyon. Distant birds called from some unseen perch. But above all that, she heard something else, faint, broken, nearly lost in the expanse of the valley. Her father's voice, Lou. The sound echoed off the rock walls carried by the breeze. Raw, desperate, terrified. Lou, please, Lou. Her chest tightened. She didn't know whether to reply or stay silent. Fear of him mingled with the remnants of love she still felt. Her heart hurt in a way no physical wound could explain. She opened her mouth, but her throat constricted. She couldn't speak. Her voice was trapped under the weight of shock. Lou! Alva's cries cracked sharply. Please, God, answer me. She felt a shiver run through her, not from the cold, but from hearing the sound of a man breaking. She could picture him above, pacing along the ridge, searching wildly, staring over the edge into the darkness below, calling her name until his voice failed. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't planned this. And now he was drowning in the consequence. Lua turned her head slightly, each motion a battle against pain. The ledge she had landed on was narrow, uneven, covered in crushed branches and tufts of brush. A few more feet in either direction and she would have hit rock. Harder, deadly. The thought stole her breath. She looked upward again, though she couldn't see him, only the steep wall of the cliff rising above her. Her body ached, but fear pushed her to try again. Dad. She tried to call, but it came out a whisper, swallowed instantly by the canyon's vastness. She licked her dry lips, tried again. Dad. This time it was louder, but still too soft to carry far. Above her, his voice broke again. She heard a sharp cry, one of pure anguish, the kind that reminds a person of every mistake they ever made. She wanted to shut her eyes. She wanted to disappear. She wanted him to stop calling. She wanted him to keep calling. Emotion churned inside her, tangled into knots she couldn't begin to untie. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time lost meaning in the haze of pain and adrenaline. Her breaths grew shallow and quick again. Her arms trembled each time she tried to shift her weight. You have to stay awake, she told herself. You have to. She couldn't die here. Not now. Not with a life inside her depending on her strength. She pressed her palm protectively over her belly once more, drawing courage from that tiny heartbeat. Her body throbbed in waves, but each wave reminded her she was still alive. Finally, she heard something new. Footsteps, distant but approaching. Voices, more than one. Someone was up there with her father. A response. Help. She forced her dry lips apart. Down here, she whispered. Her voice failed again. She took a shallow breath, gathered whatever strength remained, and pushed it out. "Down here!" She wasn't sure if the shout carried far enough, but it was all she had. Then, "I heard something," a man's voice said from above. Her heart leaped. "Over here!" another voice called. Branches shifted high above. The crunch of footsteps grew louder, closer, more urgent. "I'm here," she managed, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "I'm here." Silence followed, just for a heartbeat. Then sudden movement, frantic and sharp. "Oh God, Lou!" Her father's voice cracked. "I hear her down below. She's alive, she's alive." More voices answered him, rushed, coordinated, steady. People began shouting instructions. Someone looked over the edge. Lou saw only a shadow at first, then a figure leaning closer. "I see her!" the man yelled. "She's on a ledge. She's breathing!" Her vision blurred. Relief washed over her so strongly she felt dizzy. The man's voice echoed down. "Stay still! We're getting help!" Lou let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She closed her eyes for a moment, but forced them open again. She reminded herself not to faint, not now. Above her, Alva made a sound unlike any she had ever heard, a mix of grief, shock, and relief, a sound from a man staring at the consequences of his own terror. "I'm here, Lou," he called, voice cracking. "I'm right here. Hold on, please hold on." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat closed around a sob she wasn't ready to let out. She wasn't ready to face him yet. The next stretch felt both urgent and painfully slow. Two rescuers anchored ropes and began their descent. Their movements were controlled, voices calm and encouraging. Lou blinked through dizziness as they reached her. "You're safe now," one said gently. "We've got you." She nodded weakly. "We're going to lift you up," the other said. "You're going to feel some pressure. Try not to move." She didn't trust her voice, so she squeezed her eyes shut in response. They secured a harness around her, careful to avoid her abdomen. Each tug sent pain shooting through her ribs and hips. She bit down on her lip, tasting blood, but she refused to cry out. She kept one hand over her stomach, shielding her baby like instinct commanded. As they lifted her, she felt the ledge disappear beneath her. Her body swung slightly, brushing against rock. She gasped as sharp pain shot through her side. "You're doing great," one rescuer said. "Almost there." She forced her eyes open as she rose higher. Rock walls inched past her. The sky grew closer. Then, finally, she reached the ridge. Hands reached for her. Voices surrounded her. Then, a shadow fell over her. Alva. He fell to his knees beside her, hands trembling violently. Tears streaked his face. His breath came in broken fragments. "Lou," he whispered. "Oh God, Lou, I'm so sorry." She turned her head away. She couldn't look at him. Not yet. She wasn't ready for the weight of everything he'd done to collide with the weight of everything she'd survived. Her body shook from pain, shock, and the overwhelming relief of hearing rescuers talk. Steady, calm, focused. One placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly. For the first time since the fall, she believed it. But safety didn't erase the ache in her chest, or the question that would haunt her for years. How do you forgive someone who nearly destroyed you out of love twisted by fear? She didn't know yet. She didn't have to know yet. All she knew was that she was alive. Her baby was alive. And nothing would ever be the same again. The ambulance lights cut through the evening, as if the valley itself had been stitched with sudden, urgent color. People gathered at a distance, neighbors drawn by the sound of sirens and the low electric hum of crisis. Word spread faster than anyone expected. A girl had fallen from the ridge. The rest of the story threaded after that, how she was alive, where she was found, who had been there. Facts that felt too small and too large all at once. At the hospital, Lou lay propped on a narrow bed under bright lights that made the room feel unreal, like a stage set where everything important happened at once. Monitors beeped around her in steady, reassuring rhythms. Nurses moved with practiced calm, speaking in professional tones that somehow helped hold the world together. The pain in her side flared with each breath, but the steady, persistent rhythm under her palm was the certainty she needed most. A small, strong heartbeat. Harvey waited in the chair beside her, looking exhausted and raw. He had run from the ridge and hadn't stopped until they told him she was at this hospital. Now he sat with his hands clasped, eyes red-rimmed, as if each second tethered to her bed could pull her back to safety. When Lou stirred and opened her eyes, he reached for her hand without thinking. "You scared me," he said, voice thin. "You came," she answered, and managed a small, tired smile. Outside the curtain, Alva arrived in cuffs, escorted by 2 officers. He did not look like a man who had expected to be handled this way. He looked like a man who had been stripped of every illusion he had about his power to protect. He moved slowly, head bowed, and when he passed strangers in the hallway, their eyes flicked away, some with pity, some with barely disguised anger. A doctor knocked gently at the curtain. "Mr. Lewitkin, we need to speak with you and your daughter," she said. Her tone was gentle but practiced. "Right now, we need to focus on Lou's medical care and getting her stable." Alva's face crumpled. He lowered himself onto the chair opposite Lou's bed and covered his face with trembling hands. For a long moment, he simply sobbed. Not the controlled tears of a man trying to maintain appearances. These were raw, a man finally in the place where the weight of his actions landed like a physical blow. Harvey watched him without moving. Anger and something softer wrestled in his expression, a storm subdued by the urgency of the moment. He squeezed Lou's hand tighter, the small contact a lifeline. The police officer who had accompanied Alva cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Lutkin, we're required to follow certain procedures." His voice was steady, not unkind. "There will be an inquiry, but right now the patient's well-being is the priority." Alva's head snapped up, eyes desperate. Please tell me she's okay. Tell me she's okay." The doctor exchanged a glance with a nurse before she addressed him. "She's stable for now. She's sustained multiple abrasions, a fractured rib, some internal bruising, but the baby's heartbeat is strong. We're monitoring both closely." She said the last sentence slowly, as though allowing the words to settle into the air. Silence dropped, heavy and then fragile with relief. Alva's hands shook as he reached for Lou's. "Lou," he whispered, voice ragged. He couldn't finish. The apology sat in his throat like a stone. Her gaze slid to him. The ache she felt was complicated. Relief that she had survived, sorrow at his brokenness, anger at what he had done, and a strange, fragile thread of compassion. She did not speak for a long beat. "I'm sorry," Alva said again, barely audible. "I am so sorry. He looked up, eyes raw. "I lost myself." Harvey's jaw tightened. "You pushed her," he said plainly. There was no accusation in his tone so much as a simple, hard fact drawn into the light. Alva flinched at the words as if struck. He swallowed. "I didn't mean," he started, then choked. "I panicked. I thought I was protecting her." "You risked her life," Harvey said, not letting the explanation slide into excuse. "You risked the baby's life." Alva's shoulders curled inward, as if he wanted to make himself as small as possible. "I know," he breathed. "I know." Lou shifted, the motion sending a flare of pain through her ribs. She pressed her lips together until they went white. "Dad," she said finally, voice raw but steady. "You almost killed me." His body convulsed. He crumpled openly, the kind of weeping that leaves a person drained and empty. He pressed his hands to his eyes. "I didn't mean to. I thought I was saving you." "You weren't saving me," Lou said, each word measured. "You were trying to control me." The room quieted as if everyone present held their breath, listening to those 2 simple sentences collide, truths neither could take back. Outside the acute edges of the moment, the officers recorded statements. Questions were asked, and Alva answered, broken and unguarded. There would be a formal investigation, they said. There might be charges, but in the small fluorescent-lit room, the shape of what mattered was clearer. Lou was alive, the baby was alive. A father had irrevocably crossed a line. Later, when the initial bustle had calmed, Harvey stepped out into the corridor and sent a message to his grandmother, who had been frantic since Lou's fall. Then he returned and sat with Lou in the hush between the ventilator sounds and the staff's soft footsteps. "You should rest," he murmured. "I'll make sure they check everything. I'll be right here." She nodded. "Promise me one thing, anything." He looked up, determined. "Don't let him be alone tonight," she said quietly. "Not that he deserves it, but don't let him face everything without someone there to remind him of what he did." Harvey's eyes flicked to Alva, who slumped in the visitor's chair, staring at his hands as if trying to unlearn the grip he had used earlier. Harvey hesitated, then nodded. "He's going to have to face it," Harvey said softly. "But you're right. He shouldn't be alone in this. For now, let me handle it." The hours that followed blurred. Nurses checked vitals. The doctor explained what to expect. Lou slept in fits and starts. At one point she woke, feverish and disoriented, and reached automatically for Harvey. He was there, steady, an anchor. When morning came, there were more formalities. Detectives arrived to take a formal statement. Social workers spoke gently about support options. Medical staff discussed follow-up care. There was talk of counseling for Alva and for Lou, care that acknowledged both the physical trauma and the emotional rupture. Alva agreed, quietly and earnestly, to cooperate. He accepted the need for therapy, for oversight, for accountability. He vowed to do the work. He said the words and they trembled with sincerity. Whether he would follow through was a question that only time could answer. For now, the first step was acceptance. The town buzzed with a mix of fear and sympathy. Some called Alva a monster. Others murmured that grief and blame were tangled in ways they couldn't untangle. For Lou, the noise outside felt distant and small compared to the more intimate reckoning in the hospital room. The slow, painful, necessary work of naming what had happened and starting to stitch the pieces back together. Before the detectives left, they turned to Lou and asked gently, "How were you feeling?" She looked at Harvey, then at her father, then at the steady monitors that hummed like a second heartbeat in the room. She thought of the ledge where she had landed, of the brush that had saved her from worse, of Harvey's hands, of her father's face as he realized what he had done. "I'm alive," she said slowly, "and so is the baby. I'm scared, I'm hurt, but I'm here." The detective nodded, making a note. "If you need anything, medical, legal, emotional, there are resources. We'll connect you." As they left, Alva called out a single word, raw and small. "Lou." She turned. "I am sorry," he said. "I know words mean little right now, but I mean it with everything I have." She looked at him for a long time, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in assessment. There was grief there too, and a weary kind of compassion that surprised her. "I don't know what I'll say," she admitted. "Not now. Maybe not for a long time." Alva nodded, tears tracking down his face. "I'll do whatever it takes." The detectives left, the hospital room filled with an odd, fragile quiet. Lou rested back against the pillow, exhaustion pressing down like a physical weight. Harvey leaned his head on the bed rail and closed his eyes. Outside, the valley began to stir with morning life. Mail trucks, distant shovels, the low hum of a new day. Inside the room, two people who had once been strangers bound by love sat in the aftermath of something that would demand honesty, accountability, and the slow, patient work of healing. The rest of the story now belonged to time, medical checkups, court procedures, therapies, and the hard decisions about what it meant to forgive or to hold someone to account. For Lou, it also meant something else, that the life inside her had become not only a reason to survive, but a reason to build something better, on her own terms, with whoever truly chose to stand beside her. And as the morning light filled the hospital window, she closed her eyes for a moment, felt the steady beat beneath her hand, and breathed. The weeks after the hospital were a jumbled map of appointments, paperwork, and small, careful steps toward something that could be called recovery. Lou moved between doctor visits and counseling sessions, each new check-in a little victory. Her ribs mended slowly, the bruises faded into faint, pale memories. The scar that would remain on her elbow wasn't the only mark she carried. There were also the small, private ones that didn't show on charts, mistrust in the spaces once filled with comfort, the sudden jump of breath at loud noises, the memory of hands that had become a weapon in a single instant. Harvey never left her side. He took time off work, sat in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, and learned how to navigate conversations with doctors and social workers as if he'd been doing it all his life. He drove her to prenatal appointments, bringing along the same steady optimism he had shown in the meadow. When Louie felt the baby kick for the first time after the fall, Harvey laughed like the sound itself could fill every hollow place. He bought her warm socks for cold nights and ridiculous pregnancy books that promised to make parenting feel like a manageable science. His presence became a kind of constant, a reliable rhythm in the messy, uncertain days. Alva's days took a different shape. The legal process moved forward with the sort of careful pacing that makes everything feel simultaneously slow and urgent. There were interviews and statements and the kind of paperwork that forces private pain to become public record. Alva cooperated with the investigators. He agreed to counseling through community programs and to be monitored while decisions were made about formal charges. He met with a court-appointed advocate who explained the path of accountability, the possible outcomes, and what it would mean for him to make amends that were more than words. Those first meetings with the therapist were the hardest thing Alva had ever done. In a fluorescent-lit room, he sat across from a woman with patient eyes and a clipboard and talked about fears he had stuffed for years, the guilt he'd carried about his wife's death, the pressure of being the only parent left, the shame that seeped into every corner of his life. He forced himself to say the things he'd always avoided, how he had used control like armor, how grief had calcified into rules that became prison bars for Lou. The words came out raw and clumsy, but they came. Each session peeled away a layer of stubborn defense. "I'm not looking for forgiveness," he said once, voice small. "I want to understand, and if I can't earn your trust back, I want to at least do the work so I won't hurt anyone else." It was the kind of sentence that sounded simple and enormous at once. Community members reacted in ways that reflected all the complexities of a small town. Some people turned their backs, whispering judgment and wondering how a man they'd known for years could do something so unforgivable. Others offered cautious support, believing that a broken man could still choose to repair what he had shattered. In the grocery store and at church functions, people stared at Alva in different degrees of pity and reproach. Some neighbors brought casseroles, others refused to meet his eye. For Lou, the outside noise was both comforting and unbearable. She appreciated the meals, the offers of help, the kindness from people who had once sat on porches sharing stories. But the stares, the half-answered questions, the people who asked for details she didn't know them, those things felt invasive and heavy. Therapy for Lou began with the basics, establishing safety, learning to breathe through panic, grounding techniques for the moments when memory looped like a broken record. Her counselor, a woman with an easy laugh and an unflappable calm, helped Lou name what she felt. Anger, grief, relief, love, confusion, without trying to tidy it into one simple emotion. They spoke about boundaries and the meaning of consent within family relationships, about the difference between protection and ownership. They practiced small exercises so Lou could re-enter spaces that once felt threatening, stepping into the kitchen for a minute longer each day, going for short walks by the creek, allowing herself to sit on the porch without looking, over her shoulder every few seconds. One afternoon they did a guided visualization. Lou closed her eyes and pictured herself in the meadow with Harvey, the grass soft beneath her knees, the oak tree steady above. The counselor guided her through slow, deliberate breaths, reminding her to anchor in the present. Feel the grass, hear the birds, note the warmth of the sun. When she opened her eyes, the world looked just a fraction less dangerous. The legal system could not erase the memory of the fall. There were hearings and a formal inquiry into Alva's actions. He faced charges related to endangering a minor and causing serious bodily harm. The court process was sobering in public, another kind of exposure. But one thing the courtroom could do was enforce constraints that Alva could not evade on his own: supervised visits, mandatory counseling, community service. Those measures offered a texture of safety that Lou needed, both practically and emotionally. They meant the man who had once made unilateral decisions over her life would now be held to external standards and watched when he tried to interact with her world. Rebuilding trust was neither quick nor linear. At first, Alva's presence felt raw and destabilizing. Seeing him in the grocery aisle or at a family meeting could still trigger a tide of panic. But the small, consistent steps mattered. He attended every session he had been assigned without protest. He wrote pages, letters in therapy, about his past, about how grief had metastasized into control. He volunteered at the community center, fixing fences and painting walls with the same quiet attention he once gave to strangers who needed help. It was awkward at times, and it didn't erase the past, but it showed a pattern of effort that couldn't be dismissed as mere performative contrition. Lou set boundaries with care. She allowed supervised visits at first, Harvey sitting just outside the hospital room the first time Alva saw their daughter after the baby was born, a presence that made the meeting feel safe. She insisted on being present during conversations that felt important. When Alva cried in the empty farmhouse one night, she did not rush to comfort him. She listened from the doorway and stepped away when she felt uneasy. Those moments felt like a dance, steps forward, pauses, a steady negotiation of closeness and distance. Harvey's family wrapped around them in practical and quiet ways. His grandmother offered a spare bedroom when Lou needed a break from the farmhouse. Harvey's mother brought extra baby items and sat with Lou during appointments so she could rest. They never spoke poorly of Alva aloud, but they also respected Lou's need for distance, offering support rather than solutions. Slowly, something else began to appear, small proofs that life could move forward. Lou took up a class at the community college, nutrition, because she wanted to learn how to feed a baby well. She studied in the library while Harvey practiced guitar softly in the corner, the music a domestic soundtrack that felt ordinary and precious. She planted a small pot of herbs on her windowsill, watching green shoots come to life after tending them each morning. None of these things erased the fracture. They were tiny acts of reclamation, a way of saying, I am still here. I will keep building. Alva's progress was imperfect. He missed appointments at times or showed up flustered, his resentment at being exposed surfacing in angry outbursts when he felt judged. He stumbled more than once, but he also owned those missteps in therapy and worked to correct them. His remorse was not a single grand gesture. Rather, it was a sequence of small, awkward attempts at repair that, when added together, created a pattern. He learned how to ask for help. He learned how to answer directly when asked about his feelings. He learned how to let others hold him accountable when his instincts drifted toward control. By the time the baby was born, a fragile new rhythm existed between them. There were supervised visits, measured conversations, and a cautious hope that someone who had broken trust could show up every day and do the difficult work of being present without dominating. Lou's sense of agency had grown. She made decisions about medical care, about who could be present for visits, about the pace of reconciliation. She had the power to say no, and people around her respected that. Healing did not mean forgetting. It did not mean that the fall was anything less than what it was. But it meant that some days no longer began with dread. It meant Lou could laugh more than she had in months. It meant Harvey learned how to be patient in a way that steadied her. It meant Alva, imperfect and penitent, started to rebuild a life that included accountability rather than control. And sometimes late at night, when the house was quiet and the baby slept softly in the next room, Lou would run her fingers along the faint scar on her elbow and think about how fragile things could be and how resilient she had proven to herself that she was. The past was never going away, but the future, she realized, would be shaped by the choices she made now. Choices made with courage, boundaries, and a fierce intention to protect the life she carried and the one she would raise. The labor began in the hush between midnight and dawn, when the farmhouse felt most like a vessel holding breath. Lou woke with a sharp, steady pressure that announced itself without warning. For a dizzy second she forgot where she was, then the memory of the ridge and the ledge returned like a bruise. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, feeling the small, certain movement there, and she knew this was the moment she had both feared and longed for. Harvey sprang into motion with a quiet efficiency that had become his hallmark. He gathered the bag they had packed weeks before, soft blankets, the small knitted cap Harvey's grandmother had stitched, a folder with medical records. He murmured calm directions and drove with care, his eyes flicking to Lou more often than to the road. In the hospital, the staff moved with practiced focus, but everything felt intimate, held in the small circle of light around Lou and Harvey. Contractions came with a rhythm that was at once brutal and sacred. Lou breathed in the way she'd practiced, slow, deliberate, each exhale pushing through the pain. The nurse offered steady hands and softer words. A midwife kept her voice low and confident, a radio of small comfort in a room that felt suddenly both vast and very narrow, just the two of them and what they were about to bring into the world. Alva arrived later, escorted as before, sitting quietly in the waiting room with his hands clenched together. He had kept his promises to attend therapy and to remain accountable. The hospital had arranged a supervised visit, and though the encounter felt fragile, he was allowed to be present at a distance, aware and watchful, not intruding. Each surge of contraction brought Lou closer and closer to the threshold of meeting the child she had carried through fear, anger, and a fierce determination to keep her. Harvey never left her side. He changed his grip on her hand when she asked. He whispered steady, simple affirmations. "You're doing this. You're amazing. I'm here." The kind of words that can shape a person's courage when their body feels like it's being rearranged. At one point, when a contraction tightened with an intensity that made Lou's vision blur at the edges, she pressed her forehead to Harvey's palm and breathed out a sound that was part pain and part release. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "We're almost there." The room hummed with that strange mix of clinical procedure and an intimacy older than language. The baby's heartbeat was steady and strong on the monitor. Machines murmured their routines. Lou could feel that small life pushing insistently toward the world, a stubborn rhythm that had survived a fall and kept beating. Between contractions, Lou thought of the ridge, the place that had become a dividing line in her life, and of the ledge where she had landed, the brush that had softened the fall. She thought of the rescuers who had come, and of Harvey running until he couldn't feel his legs. She thought of the hospital room where Alva had sobbed, and of the tentative, enforced steps he had taken since. None of it fit neatly into a single emotion. It was a tapestry of grief and grace, of failure and stubborn, ordinary courage. When the moment finally arrived, it was a fierce and quiet thing. A cry filled the room, small at first, then louder, urgent, and immediate. Lou felt the sudden flood of everything. Pain, relief, disbelief, joy. For a breathless instant she only listened, letting the sound wash through her like an answer to a prayer she had whispered in the dark. Harvey's face broke into a kind of reverent awe as the midwife placed the baby on Lou's chest. The child was small and pink, fists curled, eyes fluttering closed as if unsure what to make of this new bright air. Lou's tears came so freely she had to laugh through them, an odd wet sound that felt like permission to feel everything at once. "She's perfect," Harvey whispered. Lou stared down at the tiny face, the slight lift of a brow, the soft slope of a nose. "Hi," she breathed. "Hi, baby." They named her Solène, a name Lou had loved since first hearing it in a song months before. It meant brightness, and for both of them, it felt like the right word, a small flare of light in a long stretch of darkness. Alva stood back, supervised by a nurse at a respectful distance. When he finally moved forward for the brief, monitored visit arranged by the hospital, his steps were tentative, as if each footfall might break something delicate. He didn't ask to hold the baby at first. He watched instead, hands folded, tears running down his cheeks. The woman who had sat across from him in therapy, patient eyes, a clipboard, and the steady request for honesty, had explained the limits and the reasons. Alva accepted them gratefully, nodding as if he understood the cost of overstepping. When the nurse offered the baby to him for a supervised moment, he took her with hands that trembled. Solène's tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger in a reflexive grip so gentle and small it caused something to unclench inside him. He brought her to his chest and rested his forehead against the soft crown of her head, the way a man might find refuge in a small, unquestioning life. Alva's voice broke when he spoke. "I can't believe I get to see you," he whispered to the baby. Then he looked at Lou. "Thank you," he said, voice ragged, "for giving me this chance." Lou met his eyes. The look between them was complicated, an acceptance of the moment, a guardedness, and a recognition that gratitude didn't erase the past. "I don't know what the future will hold," she said softly, "but I know this. She's here. She's ours." Harvey squeezed her hand, eyes wet and luminous. "We did it," he said simply. The early days that followed were tender and raw in equal measure. Solène fed with a determined eagerness. She slept in fits and starts and made noises like a tiny, vibrating song. When she dreamed, Lou learned the choreography of night feedings, of diaper changes, of quieting a small body with her heartbeat. Harvey took to humming softly as he rocked Solène, his voice a low, gentle presence that made the late hours less lonely. Visits from family were arranged with care. Harvey's grandmother brought warm casseroles and sat quietly with them as they adjusted to a new rhythm. Alva attended supervised visits, sitting on a chair at a careful distance so Lou and Harvey could set the pace. Sometimes he read quietly in the corner while the baby slept, his eyes lifting to watch Solène and then returning to the page as if testing whether small, steady acts could become his new way of living. Lou felt exhaustion settled into her bones, but beneath it, there was a deep and growing love that softened the edges of fear. Each time Solène opened her eyes and looked up at Lou, there was a small, fierce certainty that this life had been worth every risk, every moment of pain. Where once the ridge had stood as a dividing line of terror, now her child's presence formed its own unambiguous line. Here, life had persevered. At night, when the house fell silent and the baby breathed in tiny measured rhythms in the bassinet, Lou sat at the window and watched the valley outside. The ridgeline that had once felt like an impossible scar was just a dark line against the sky. It no longer felt like a wound she carried alone. It was part of their story, one of many threads that included grief, harm, repair, and this new light. She did not imagine everything would be easy. There would be challenges. There would be days of doubt. There would be moments when the weight of the past threatened to unbalance the fragile present. But held in her arms was proof of what perseverance could do. Solène's small fingers curled around Louis's thumb, and in that small grip was the promise that they would keep going, together. And for now, that was enough. The months after Solène's birth passed in a slow, shifting rhythm that felt completely different from the chaos that had defined the year before. Each day carried its own small story, a new sound from the baby, a late-night feeding that softened Lou's exhaustion with its sweetness, a quiet morning walk with Harvey in the crisp air, while Solène slept bundled against Lou's chest. As the routine settled into place, the ridge faded in sharpness but never in importance. It existed in the background like an outline, the kind a sculptor traces before shaping something new. Lou would sometimes look toward it during morning drives or when she walked to the mailbox. It didn't make her recoil anymore. Instead, it brought a different sensation, a reminder of where she had been and of the person she was becoming. Healing takes time, and reflection takes even longer. One cool afternoon, Lou stood on the porch while Solène napped inside. She wrapped her sweater tighter and looked toward the distant line of rock. The autumn light was gentle, painting the edges of the valley in warm gold. Harvey was at work for the day, helping his uncle repair fences on a nearby farm. The quiet around her was deep and still. She took a slow breath and felt a strange combination of calm and clarity. So much had changed, and yet some things still lingered. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her thoughts settle. What had she learned? The answers came in a series of quiet truths. She had learned that love, when mixed with fear, can twist into shapes that hurt more than they protect. Her father's intentions hadn't been malicious, but intention wasn't a shield against harm. She knew now that caring for someone didn't excuse their actions. And being someone's child didn't mean she had to accept wounds in the name of love. She had learned that boundaries weren't walls meant to shut people out. They were lines drawn to keep people honest, including herself. They were a way of saying, I exist separately, my choices matter, my life has value. Until she learned that, she had drifted too easily into guilt and responsibility that wasn't hers to hold. She had learned that fear can turn even gentle people into versions of themselves they no longer recognize. Fear had driven her father to the brink. It had blinded him. It had destroyed reasoning that had once made him kind. And she had learned that unless a person confronted that fear honestly, it would keep shaping the choices they made. But she had also learned that fear didn't have to be permanent. With accountability and real work, it could be understood and dismantled. She saw this in the way Alva approached his therapy, in the slow, steady progress he made, in the moments when something in him softened, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. She had learned that forgiveness and reconciliation were not interchangeable. She could forgive him for the fall. She could forgive him for the panic that seared through every second of that moment. She could forgive him for the years of pressed-down grief that made him believe control was safety. But forgiveness didn't mean rushing to give him the same place in her life he once held. It didn't mean trusting him the same way. Trust wasn't a door that opened just because someone knocked. It was something rebuilt one small action at a time, and she had every right to decide what pieces she wanted back. She had learned the difference between saying she was fine and actually being fine. She had learned that her baby, tiny as she was, had made her braver than she thought possible. When she placed her hand on her stomach after the fall, she realized that the instinct to protect had nothing to do with age or experience. It was something primal, fierce, beautiful. She had learned that Harvey's love was steady, not the kind that flared up only in grand gestures, but the kind that persisted through the slow, unglamorous work of early mornings, late nights, doctor visits, and fears he never mocked or brushed aside. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He showed up when they counted. He listened when she struggled. He let her lead when she needed control. He supported her without overshadowing her. She had learned the deep, grounding comfort of partnership, real partnership, a kind rooted not in intensity or passion alone, but in trust, honesty, and patience. She had learned that becoming a mother didn't end her dreams. It sharpened them, clarified them. Solène didn't erase her future, she expanded it. And most surprisingly, she had learned that resilience isn't a heroic stance or a mighty roar. It's something quieter. It's breathing through the worst moment of your life and choosing, somehow, not to collapse into bitterness. It's pressing forward even when the past pulls at your heels. It's letting yourself be changed without letting yourself be defined by tragedy. Lou stood in the fading light, tears stinging her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything she had survived. Behind her, a soft cry sounded from inside the house. She smiled, wiped her cheek, and went in to check on Solène. The baby blinked sleepily, and Lou scooped her into her arms with practiced tenderness. "You're growing so fast," she murmured, rocking her gently. "You have no idea how strong you already are." The door creaked behind her. She turned to find Alva standing on the porch, supervised by a support worker who stayed discreetly in the background. He looked tentative, holding a small paper bag in his hands. "I didn't want to show up unannounced," he said softly. "She told me it was okay to drop this off." He lifted the bag. "It's just some groceries and a few things I thought the baby might need." Lou's heart tightened, not painfully but with a quiet recognition of the work he was trying to do. "Thank you," she said gently. "You can leave it there." He did, but he didn't leave right away. He looked at Solène, then at Lou. "She looks like you," he whispered. Lou nodded. "She's doing well." Silence filled the space between them, not heavy but cautious. "I'm learning," Alva said, slowly. "I know I can't ask for much. I just want to keep trying." Lou met his eyes. She didn't soften or harden. She simply stood in the truth she had earned. "I know you're trying," she said, "and I appreciate that, but we're taking this one step at a time." He nodded, relieved, humbled, accepting. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve to say it, but I am." Lou didn't respond right away. She looked at her daughter, then at her father. "I'm proud of myself too," she said. He let out a breath that trembled. "I hope one day I can make things right." "That's up to you," she said, "not me." He nodded, then stepped back. The support worker gave Lou an affirming nod before guiding him down the porch steps. When they left, Lou held Solène close and pressed a kiss to her forehead. The ridge had once been a scar, but now it was a reminder. She had survived. She had learned, and she had risen in ways she never thought she could. Some lessons arrive softly, others come from the edge of a cliff, but each one had shaped her into the woman standing here now, stronger, clearer, and ready for the life unfolding ahead. The valley changed with the seasons, and so did Lou's life. What once felt fragile began to take on new strength, slowly, quietly, in ways she barely noticed at first. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was a series of small, steady choices she made every day. The farmhouse that once echoed with tension became a place filled with different sounds. Solène's delighted squeals, the soft hum of Harvey singing as he warmed bottles in the kitchen, the buzz of lullabies drifting through the hallway. The air felt lighter now. Lou moved through her rooms with purpose instead of fear. She'd enrolled in classes at the community college, determined to build a future that gave her options and independence. On Wednesday mornings, she sat in a small classroom with her notebook open and her hands ink stained from highlighting, studying subjects she once thought were too far from her reach. The other students were older, younger, and everything in between. No one stared at her belly. No one whispered about the past. She was simply Lou, student, mother, survivor, young woman with a future. Harvey supported her every step of the way. He worked extra hours at his uncle's farm and picked up shifts helping a local handyman so Lou could go to class. Some days he brought Solène to campus so they could eat lunch together under a shady oak tree. They'd sit with a blanket spread out, sharing sandwiches while Solène kicked and cooed on her back, fascinated by the shifting shadows of leaves above her. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and for Lou, stability felt extraordinary. Harvey and Lou's relationship matured in ways she had once only imagined. Their love wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was grounded, built on late-night conversations, shared exhaustion, and the simple rhythm of two young people learning how to raise a child together. Harvey showed up in ways that spoke louder than any declaration. He woke up for 2 a.m. feedings, washed bottles without being asked, carried Solène against his chest as he walked the property line in the evenings. He read parenting books with a highlighter in hand and learned to braid Lou's hair when her arms were full. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He just tried every day to be present. That effort wasn't lost on anyone. They married a few years later, not because they felt forced, and not because they thought marriage would solve their struggles. They married because the timing felt right, because they had walked through darkness and discovered something solid beneath their feet. The ceremony was small, a simple gathering beneath the same oak tree where Lou and Harvey once sat dreaming about a future they feared might slip through their fingers. The leaves rustled above them as if applauding their resilience. Guests sat on folding chairs arranged in a wide semicircle, and Solène, now a toddler with bright eyes and a laugh that bubbled like spring water, served as the flower girl, scattering petals in crooked handfuls. Harvey's grandmother cried through half the ceremony. Harvey barely kept himself together. Lou held his hands, feeling the warmth of them, the steadiness. When they said their vows, her voice didn't shake. She spoke clearly, with the quiet certainty of someone who had rebuilt her life from fractured pieces. "I choose you," she said. "Not because life has been easy with you, but because we've learned how to make it through the hardest moments. Together." Harvey's voice broke when he answered. "I choose you, every day, every moment, and I choose our daughter too. I'll protect our family with everything in me. I'll listen, I'll learn, I'll stay." When they kissed, the guests erupted into applause that echoed across the field. The future, once clouded by fear, opened wide. Alva watched the ceremony from the second row, sitting beside his court-appointed support worker, though he hadn't needed supervision for a long time now. Still, he liked having someone familiar nearby in moments that stirred old wounds. He wore a soft gray suit, clean-shaven, his posture gentle. He didn't cry loudly, but his eyes gleamed with tears from start to finish. He didn't presume to give a speech or stand too close. He waited until others had hugged the couple and congratulated them before approaching. Lou saw him hesitating at the edge of the crowd. She excused herself and walked toward him, Solène holding her hand. The little girl raced ahead the moment she saw her grandfather. "Grandpa!" she squealed, wrapping her arms around his leg. Alva leaned down and hugged her, closing his eyes for a moment as he inhaled the soft scent of her hair. Then he looked at Lou. "You look beautiful," he said, voice steady but filled with reverence. "Thank you," she replied, not looking away. I don't want to take up too much time," he murmured, fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. "But I want you to know I'm honored you allowed me to be here." "You've worked hard," Lou said. "You've shown up, you've changed. That matters." He swallowed hard. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the trust you've given back." Lou nodded. "And I'll tell you if you fall short. That's part of it too." The corner of Alva's mouth lifted in a grateful, shaky smile. "I can live with that." She hugged him, carefully, briefly, but the embrace held meaning. It was not a restoration of the past. It was the acceptance of a new relationship built on honesty, boundaries, and accountability. He hugged her back with the quiet, humbled gratitude of a man who had nearly lost everything and learned how to hold what remained with care. Years passed. Patterns held. The family grew stronger. Lou graduated with her degree and pursued work in early childhood education. Harvey opened a small workshop with his uncle, building furniture and restoring old pieces locals brought in. Their home became a lively, warm place, one filled with mismatched chairs, children's drawings taped to walls, and Solen's growing collection of storybooks scattered across the floor. Alva remained part of their lives, not hovering, not assuming, not controlling, just present. He visited on weekends, always calling ahead, always respecting boundaries. He built a wooden crib for Solen, sanded until the surface felt like polished silk. He attended therapy long after his required sessions ended, choosing to continue the work because he understood it wasn't about meeting a standard. It was about becoming someone he could live with. Every year, on the anniversary of the fall, Lou walked to the ridge, not to relive the trauma, but to remind herself of what she had survived. Harvey held her hand. Solen skipped ahead. Alva stood back, quiet, reverent. They never stayed long, just enough time for Lou to breathe, to touch the stone, to let the weight of the past settle into something she could carry without fear. She no longer saw the ridge as a wound. She saw it as a marker, a place that changed the course of her life, a place that nearly ended her, a place that taught her what resilience truly meant, a place that showed her who she loved, who she needed to become, and who she could forgive without surrendering herself. In the evenings, Lou often stood in the doorway of Solen's room, watching her daughter sleep. The soft glow of a nightlight cast gentle shadows on the walls. Lou would place a hand on the doorframe and breathe deeply, feeling gratitude settle in her bones. She had created a life that honored her strength and her choices, and though her past would always be part of her, it no longer dictated her future. Her future belonged to her, to Harvey, to Solen, to the quiet, steady love she built from the ground up. And for the first time in years, when Lou looked toward tomorrow, she didn't feel fear. She felt hope. What happened on that ridge should have ended a life. Instead, it rewrote one. Lou Strike walked to the edge of a cliff as a frightened 16-year-old fighting for her right to choose her own future. And she came back as someone stronger, wiser, and unbreakably determined. Not because the world protected her, but because she chose to rise even when everything around her tried to pull her down. Her survival wasn't luck alone. It was the heartbeat she felt on that ledge, the same heartbeat that pushed her forward through fear, through uncertainty, through years of slow, careful rebuilding. That tiny pulse became her anchor. Harvey stood beside her through it all, steady, patient, and willing to grow. Their love didn't flare up in dramatic bursts. It showed itself in the daily moments, the late-night feedings, the whispered encouragement, the promises kept quietly over time. Their relationship proved that real love isn't loud, it's consistent. And then there was Alva Lewitkin, a man who crossed a line that cannot be erased, but who refused to turn away from accountability. He did the work. He confronted the fear that had shaped his worst choices, and step by step, he rebuilt what he nearly destroyed, not by asking for forgiveness, but by earning back the right to stand in his daughter's life. His story reminds us that redemption isn't a moment, it's a discipline. Lou's journey became a reminder to everyone in Garnet Valley, and to all of us watching, that darkness doesn't have to be the end of a story. Sometimes, it's the place where a new one begins. Now she stands in a life she built with her own strength, a home full of love instead of fear. A daughter named Solen who lights every room she enters. A future that stretches wider than any valley or ridge she's ever stood upon. And every year, when Lou walks back to that cliff, she doesn't go to relive her trauma. She goes to honor her victory. The ridge doesn't define her anymore. Her resilience does. If this story moved you, don't leave just yet. Your support truly keeps this channel alive. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that reminds us how powerful survival, love, and hope can be. Like this video if you believe Lou's strength deserves to be seen by more people. Comment below, what lesson do you think stands out most from Lou's journey? I read every single comment, and your voice helps build this community. And please share this video with someone who needs a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can rise. Thank you for being here, new viewers, returning viewers, all of you who stay until the very end. Your time means more to me than you know. Until the next story. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, sometimes the fall doesn't break us. Sometimes it teaches us how to fly. Story 2. The hikers started their morning like any other, stepping through the chilled air of Hartwell Ridge's mountain trail with no expectation that their lives were about to change. Their conversation faded as one of them paused, drawn towards something lying just beyond a cluster of pine. At first it looked like fabric tangled in the underbrush, but as they approached, the silence around them tightened. What they found wasn't clothing. It was a woman, still, alone, and left with a cruelty that words rarely capture. Her name would soon echo across every corner of the region, Edith Cole, missing for weeks, believed by many to be living a life of comfort. But this discovery exposed a truth so shocking that even seasoned authorities struggled to speak about it. Edith had been found without her vital organs, abandoned as though her life meant nothing to the person who took it from her. A life dismantled, a secret left under pine needles and cold shadows. And every sign pointed toward the one person she believed could offer her safety. Before you judge her choices, let me ask you something. Most of us have, whether in love, in friendship, or in a moment when fear convinced us to grab onto the wrong hand. We all want security. We all want to feel protected, valued, lifted out of whatever scares us. Edith was no different. She wanted a life where fear didn't control her, a life where money solved the worries that had shaped her since childhood. But instead, she walked straight into the path of someone who used charm like a mask and wealth like bait. Someone who understood exactly how to appeal to a woman longing for safety, but offered her the opposite. Her story is not just about a terrible crime, it's about the way hope can be turned against us. It's about the way one decision, made in desperation or longing, can redraw everything we thought we understood about the world. And this is where the questions begin. How did a marriage that lasted only 3 months end with a discovery that still haunts investigators? Who exactly was Dr. Laurel Larson Jr., the man who swept her away from Hartwell Ridge with promises of a better life? And what was happening behind those stone walls long before Edith went silent? We're about to walk through every piece of this story, from her dreams to her fears, from the moments she ignored to the secrets she never had a chance to reveal. But before we do, welcome, new and returning viewers. Thank you for being here, and thank you for choosing to spend time with these powerful true American stories. If narratives like this pull you in, if you appreciate deep storytelling that honors real lives and real lessons, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Your support truly helps this channel grow and keep stories like Edith's alive. Now, before we step into Chapter 1, let me take you back to the place where all of this began. Hartwell Ridge, a small mountain town with warm lights in every window and neighbors who bring pies to your doorstep without being asked. A place where the pace is calm, the nights are quiet, and the world feels tucked away from danger. To the people who lived there, Hartwell Ridge wasn't just home. It was comfort, routine, familiarity. A place where most folks knew exactly what their lives would look like from season to season. But into this quiet setting walked a woman with bigger dreams and a longing that couldn't be contained by the gentle life around her. Edith Cole believed she was meant for more stability, more opportunity, more security. And when the man who promised all those things arrived in that town, she followed him without realizing the cost. This peaceful town will become our first contrast, the place where Edith's life felt small and the world she ran toward felt promising. But as you'll soon see, the light she chased was nothing more than the start of a long descent into danger. Her story begins in a quiet valley, but it will end far from everything she ever knew. Hartwell Ridge moved with an easy calm that many people treasured. Mornings began with friendly waves from neighbors sweeping their porches, and afternoons drifted along with the scent of pine and fresh bread from the bakery. Evenings were marked by warm lamplight glowing behind windows and conversations that carried softly from porch to porch. Life here wasn't rushed, nor was it loud. It simply moved, steady, familiar, predictable. To most, this was comfort. To Edith Cole, it felt like a reminder of everything she feared. She watched the same routines unfold day after day and felt an ache inside her, a pull towards something larger than the valley she had grown up in. The quiet that others found peaceful settled over her like a blanket she couldn't push off. While people around her built lives rooted in consistency, Edith dreamed of rooms filled with opportunity, of a future with choices rather than limitations. For her, Hartwell Ridge wasn't a destination. It was the beginning she hoped one day to leave behind. Her longing didn't come from vanity or boredom. It came from a childhood marked by uncertainty. Edith grew up in a house where bills were stacked on the kitchen counter like unwelcome guests, and her parents whispered late at night about what they could cut back on next. She remembered the strain in her father's voice whenever the truck needed repairs and the look in her mother's eyes whenever groceries had to stretch farther than they should. There were days when the electricity flickered, not because of storms, but because the payment slipped behind. Hand-me-down shoes were patched again and again, and buying anything new meant sacrificing something else. Even as a young girl, Edith understood the tension money created. She understood how quickly stability could crumble. Those years carved something deep inside her, a vow she never spoke aloud but carried everywhere. She promised herself she would never live like that again, never feel that anxious tightening in her stomach, never fear an unexpected bill, never let scarcity define her future. That wound shaped her far more than anyone in Hartwell Ridge ever realized. Corbin Hale entered her life like a quiet morning, uncomplicated, gentle, and steady. He was a carpenter with strong hands and an earnest smile, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. Corbin didn't try to impress her with grand gestures. Instead, he offered reliability in its purest form. He brought her coffee before her shifts at the bakery, carved small keepsakes for her on rainy days, and always looked at her with a tenderness that felt safe. Their relationship grew slowly, like a plant tended with care rather than haste. Corbin didn't have much, but everything he had he gave wholeheartedly. He talked about building a home with her one day, somewhere close to the river where the light hit the water just right at dusk. And though Edith cared for him deeply, she couldn't ignore the quiet whisper inside her. It was the same whisper she'd heard since childhood, the one that told her security came from more than love. Corbin's simplicity, once comforting, began to stir that old fear again. Sometimes, when she looked at him, she wasn't seeing the man she loved. She was seeing the life she worried she might be trapped in. This was the heart of Edith's internal struggle. She loved a man whose world felt too small for the dreams she carried. She cherished his kindness, but she also remembered the nights her family spent scraping by. Corbin represented sincerity, stability, and a quiet life that didn't ask for much, but Edith wanted guarantee. She wanted insulation from the fears that shaped her. She wanted to wake up in a home where bills were paid on time without question, where unexpected expenses didn't destroy peace, where choices weren't limited by what they couldn't afford. She often felt torn between the warmth of Corbin's love and the cold memory of her parents' struggles. Her heart leaned toward him, but her mind clung to the promise of a life where security couldn't be threatened. It wasn't greed, just an overwhelming desire to never feel powerless again. Sometimes she imagined her future in Hartwell Ridge and felt a knot tighten in her chest. A life of modest comfort wasn't enough to silence the fear she had carried for so long, and that fear began to overpower everything else. Hartwell Ridge had a way of holding its residents close, almost protectively, with its familiar routines and gentle pace. But for Edith, that closeness didn't feel comforting. It felt like a place designed to keep her exactly where she'd always been. The very things others adored about the town made her restless. She often stood outside after closing the bakery and felt the night settle around her like a quilt, warm, steady, and tight enough that she couldn't breathe. Her longing for a different life didn't make her ungrateful. It made her desperate for a world that didn't resemble the one she fought so hard to rise above. She wanted cities lit with opportunity, rooms filled with promise, and a future carved by ambition rather than fear. Every path in Hartwell Ridge seemed to loop back on itself, offering comfort, but not growth. And no matter how much she tried to quiet the voice inside her, it only grew louder. One evening, as Edith walked home from work, something caught her eye in the inn's parking lot. Something that didn't belong in a town like theirs. A luxury sedan, polished to perfection, reflecting the setting sun like a mirror. Its presence alone shifted the air around it. Edith slowed her steps without realizing it. The car looked out of place among the humble trucks and dented sedans lining the lot. It radiated the kind of wealth she had only ever seen in magazines left behind by travelers. Her gaze lingered longer than she intended, drawn by the silent promise it seemed to represent. A moment later, a man stepped out, well-dressed, poised, someone whose life clearly existed far beyond the edges of Hartwell Ridge. He glanced around the lot, then caught sight of her. His gaze held hers with a confidence that felt deliberate. It was only a brief moment, barely a passing exchange, but for Edith Cole, it marked the beginning of a path that would lead her far from everything she knew, and into a danger she could never have imagined. He arrived in Hartwell Ridge without warning, gliding into town behind the wheel of a car that didn't match anything on the roads for miles. The moment he stepped out, people paused, not because he demanded attention, but because he carried it with him. His posture, his attire, the measured way he observed his surroundings. Everything about him suggested a life far removed from this quiet mountain valley. Edith noticed him the way someone notices a sudden shift in temperature. Something about him stood out sharply against the backdrop of their humble town. He walked into the bakery with the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms where decisions affected entire institutions. His suit was perfectly fitted, his shoes untouched by dust, and even the way he ordered his coffee sounded refined. Customers who usually lingered over pastries found themselves glancing his way, whispering without meaning to. Edith felt a mix of curiosity and caution as she handed him his order. He met her gaze with a calm that felt intentional, as if he was studying more than just her face. He thanked her with a voice, both warm and precise, leaving behind an impression that clung to her long after he stepped through the door. From that first meeting, something in her world shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He returned the next day, and the next. At first, their exchanges were brief, limited to small talk and polite smiles. But soon his visits stretched longer, his questions drifting from casual to personal. He asked about her day, her family, the town, her dreams. He seemed genuinely interested, leaning in slightly whenever she spoke, giving her the rare feeling of being the only person in the room. His stories painted pictures of places Edith had only imagined, trips overseas, conferences in gleaming cities, and opportunities that came with connections she'd never been close enough to see. He spoke with clarity and poise, describing a world where choices weren't constrained by fear or lack. Sometimes he chuckled softly at the quirks of small-town life, but never in a way that felt insulting. Instead, he made her feel like someone who didn't truly belong there, someone deserving of more. Their conversations grew bolder with time. Compliments slid into the pauses between words, subtle at first, then unmistakably pointed. He told her she carried herself with more refinement than the town around her. He said she had a spark most people never discover in themselves. He called her the kind of woman who outgrows her surroundings. By then, Edith found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. His flattery didn't feel cheap or rushed. It felt calculated in a way she struggled to identify. He complimented her not on her appearance alone, but on qualities she feared no one else noticed. Her ambition, her hunger for possibility, the way she handled responsibility without letting it show. He seemed to understand parts of her she rarely spoke about, especially the fear she carried from childhood. When he talked about financial stability, long-term planning, investments, and safety nets, he didn't need to emphasize anything. The implications alone spoke directly to the wound she kept hidden. He never said outright that he could give her everything she'd ever wanted, but every conversation nudged her toward that conclusion. When he mentioned his home, large, private, comfortable, he did it casually, as if such things were trivial details. Yet each detail sank deeper into her thoughts. Edith began comparing the life she knew with the life he embodied, and with every passing day, the gap between the two felt more glaring. Corbin noticed the shift before Edith admitted anything to herself. She came home quieter, more distracted. Sometimes she seemed present in body but far away in thought, as if considering choices she wasn't ready to share. He tried to ask gently, aware that something was tugging at her attention, but she brushed off his concerns with soft reassurance. Still, he saw the way her eyes drifted toward her phone. He saw how she lingered at work longer than before. He saw how she grew restless when talk of the future came up. Corbin had always believed love could withstand anything, but now he felt a distance forming, not from anger or conflict, but from something more elusive, something he couldn't fix with kindness. Edith didn't mean to pull away, yet every time Dr. Larson walked into the bakery, she felt the tension grow sharper. Corbin's steady life, once a source of comfort, now reminded her of every fear she carried. Meanwhile, the doctor represented something she had chased since childhood, a life free from the anxiety she swore she'd never feel again. She didn't leave Corbin behind in a day. It was a gradual shift, step by small step, led by dreams she had kept buried for years. Hartwell Ridge had always sheltered its people with routines that were warm and predictable. But Edith felt those routines tightening around her again, the same way they did when she was a child, hearing whispered conversations about overdue payments. The town seemed to hold her in place, nudging her toward a modest future that frightened her more than she ever admitted. She found herself watching Dr. Larson more closely, noticing the confidence in his movements, the certainty in his voice, the air of someone untouched by the instability she'd grown up with. He represented a world that was controlled, polished, secure, a world she had longed for without knowing what it truly cost. In the quiet moments between customers, she imagined what it would feel like to live without, the constant fear of not having enough. And every time she pictured that life, she saw him standing in it. Her thoughts drifted further from the familiar warmth of Hartwell Ridge and closer to the alluring promise he embodied. One late afternoon, she stepped outside to take a break, and there it was again, the same luxury sedan that had first captured her attention. It gleamed beneath the lowering sun, its surface so smooth it reflected the sky like a sheet of glass. She watched it, drawn to it the way someone is drawn to a doorway leading out of a room too small for them. The driver's door opened, and Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. stepped out with the same composed confidence as the first day she saw him. He glanced around the lot, then at her. This time, the moment lingered. His expression carried a quiet assurance, an unspoken message she couldn't quite decipher but felt deeply. It was in that brief, almost insignificant moment that the foundation of her life shifted. She didn't know it yet. No one did. But the path standing before her was about to draw her into a world she never could have imagined. A world that would cost her far more than she ever intended to give. Corbin Hale had been preparing for weeks. He wanted the moment to feel special, not grand or flashy, just heartfelt. Exactly the way their relationship had always been. The ring box wasn't bought from a store. He carved it himself from a piece of walnut wood he'd saved since childhood. Inside it, he planned to place a simple ring he'd been saving up for little by little. He imagined the evening perfectly. A walk by the river, the soft sound of water against the rocks, the fading glow of dusk settling across the valley. He pictured Edith's smile, warm and bright. He pictured himself asking her to share the rest of her life with him, believing with all his heart that she felt the same. But on the night he planned to ask her, Corbin came home to a silence that didn't feel ordinary. The house wasn't messy or disturbed. It was simply still, too still, the kind of stillness that makes you realize something is missing before you fully understand what. He called her name, no answer. He looked for her shoes, gone. Her coat, gone. Only when he walked into the kitchen did he see the folded paper on the table, placed neatly beside the small vase of wildflowers he'd picked for her 2 days earlier. The handwriting was hers, gentle loops, careful strokes, but the words felt like they belonged to someone he didn't recognize. "I'm sorry, Corbin. I need a different life. Please try to understand." No explanation, no conversation, no final goodbye. Just a few lines that severed everything they had built. Corbin sank into the chair beside the note, reading the words again and again as if some hidden meaning might reveal itself. But nothing changed. The message remained painfully clear. She had left. He stared at the table where they once shared meals, where they planned small dreams, where she laughed about the smallest things. The house that usually felt warm and lived in suddenly felt unfamiliar, like he was standing in someone else's home. a place stripped of the presence he cherished most. Edith had walked out without looking back, and the worst part was, Corbin had no idea where she had gone. While Corbin sat in silence with the note trembling in his hand, Edith was already miles away. She hadn't packed much, just enough to leave without drawing attention. The rest of her belongings, she told herself, could be replaced later. What mattered now was moving forward, not turning back. Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. was waiting for her at the edge of town, leaning against his luxury sedan, with an expression that looked almost triumphant. The door to the car was already open when she arrived, as though he had no doubt she would come. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. She stepped inside, closed the door, and with that single motion, left Hartwell Ridge behind. The drive felt surreal. The town she grew up in faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by long stretches of road and the humming promise of a life she had always imagined but never touched. Dr. Larson spoke softly, praising her courage, telling her she deserved more than what she had been settling for. His voice felt reassuring, wrapping around her uncertainties like a warm hand. Edith tried not to think about Corbin. She tried not to think about the look he would have had on his face when he came home. She tried not to imagine the sound of his heart breaking as he read her note. Instead, she focused on the man beside her, on the world he represented, on the belief, however fragile, that this was the beginning of everything she had been chasing. Their wedding happened only weeks later. There was no engagement period, no careful planning, no gathering of friends or family. It was a private ceremony held in an unfamiliar place, attended only by a few of the doctor's associates. The vows were quick, the atmosphere formal, and the moment carried more weight than emotion. Edith wore a dress she picked from a boutique in a city she had never visited before. It was elegant, expensive, and nothing like the handmade styles common back home. Her shoes shined, her hair was carefully styled, and diamonds glittered at her ears, gifts from her new husband. Yet, as she stood beside Dr. Larson, she felt a strange hollowness tickle the back of her mind. It wasn't sadness exactly, more like a quiet question she didn't let herself answer. She told herself it was nerves. She told herself she was embracing a life most people only dream of. She told herself that this was what she had always wanted, a life where money wasn't a barrier, where stability didn't feel fragile. After the ceremony, she smiled for photographs she didn't get to keep. She mingled with people who spoke in measured tones about investments, research grants, and properties in places she'd never heard of. The world around her felt polished, distant, almost intimidating. But she forced her smile to hold. She believed she had finally crossed into the life she deserved. Dr. Larson whisked her into a realm of luxury she had once only glimpsed through glossy pages or passing conversations. They dined in intimate restaurants where staff greeted him by name. They traveled to a private estate guarded behind tall stone walls. He introduced her to colleagues who spoke of projects and ventures she didn't fully understand. But beneath this new life, something faint but unsettling ran through her thoughts, an echo of the simplicity she had left behind. She remembered how Corbin listened when she spoke, how he smiled when she walked into a room, how he gave affection without expecting anything in return. The contrast between the man she married and the man she left grew sharper the more she tried to ignore it. Yet she reminded herself why she made her choice. She told herself she had stepped into a life where fear couldn't reach her, where wealth acted as a shield. That was the promise she clung to whenever doubt whispered too loudly. What she didn't realize was that the life she believed would free her was slowly beginning to close around her. Late one night, Edith stood on the balcony of their room, staring out over the city lights below. The world seemed vast and full of possibility, exactly what she had always wanted. But behind her, inside the house, was the man she now trusted her entire future to. And little by little, the certainty she once felt began to waver. She turned away from the railing and walked back inside, convincing herself that everything was unfolding the way it should. She had made her choice. She had chosen a life of security over a life of simple affection. But choices always come with consequences. And this one would lead her down a path she could never have imagined, one that would take her further and further from the safety she craved. The estate appeared magnificent from the outside, an expansive property set behind tall stone walls with iron gates that slid open only after Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. entered a code into a concealed panel. The driveway curved through manicured grounds that stretched farther than Edith could follow with her eyes. It was the kind of place she once believed only existed in glossy magazines or movies, and for a moment she stood frozen, overwhelmed by its scale. When she stepped inside, the house greeted her with quiet luxury. Smooth floors reflected warm light from elegant fixtures. Large windows overlooked wide stretches of land that seemed endless. Every detail whispered wealth and exclusivity. She imagined hosting friends here, walking through the halls with a sense of pride, finally settled into a life where worry didn't shadow every decision. But the beauty came with a stillness she hadn't expected, an unsettling hush that didn't match the size of the home. The hallways echoed faintly when she walked, and she realized quickly that this wasn't a lively household. It was carefully controlled, monitored, and kept under conditions she didn't yet understand. The first week passed quietly. Dr. Larson maintained a calm, polished demeanor, guiding her through the property and introducing her to the small staff who worked there. They greeted her politely, but something about their interactions felt restrained. They answered questions carefully, with glances darting toward the doctor before responding. When he entered the room, their posture stiffened slightly. Edith tried to dismiss the discomfort. She told herself they were simply following strict professional standards. Still, she couldn't shake the impression that the staff avoided lingering near her. When she attempted small talk, they smiled politely and excused themselves quickly, never offering more than necessary. She brushed it aside and tried to focus on settling into her new life. She spent her mornings exploring the estate, her afternoons decorating the rooms she now called home, and her evenings dining beside Dr. Larson at a long table that felt far too large for just two people. At first, she felt flattered by how closely he paid attention to her routines. He asked where she was going, how long she planned to be out, and what she hoped to accomplish each day. It felt protective, until it didn't. Little by little, the boundaries around her began to shift. It began with simple requests, voiced gently but firmly. "Let me know before you leave the house, or I'd feel better if you stayed close today." She complied willingly, telling herself this was a normal adjustment to married life. But soon the requests became restrictions. Her phone, which she once kept by her side constantly, suddenly required updating. Dr. Larson handed it to a staff member, claiming it would be returned within hours. It came back, a day later, functioning, but different. Notifications were missing, and certain apps no longer open. When she asked about it, he gave a reassuring explanation she wanted to believe. Her social media access slowly disappeared under the guise of avoiding unwanted attention. He told her that his professional position required privacy, and that online accounts could pose risks. His tone held enough authority to make her feel childish for questioning it, so she nodded and let it go. Then came the rule about leaving the property. At first he suggested they go out together, so she wouldn't get lost in unfamiliar towns. Later, he insisted she stay inside the gates unless he approved the trip. The world beyond the estate began to feel farther and farther away. What initially felt like care was starting to feel like confinement. The staff's behavior grew even more troubling. They avoided eye contact when she entered her room. Conversations stopped abruptly when she approached. Tasks that once required casual coordination suddenly became rigid and silent. She caught glimpses of unease in their expressions, subtle but unmistakable. One afternoon, while walking through the hallway near the kitchen, she overheard two staff members whispering, their voices tense. But the moment they noticed her presence, they stepped back as though scolded. One of them muttered an apology before quickly disappearing into another room. The other busied herself with reorganizing dishes even though everything was already neatly arranged. Edith stood there, heart quickening. There was something they weren't saying, something they didn't dare share. That night, she tried asking her husband about the staff's behavior. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes and dismissed her concern. "They're professionals," he explained. "They know their role, nothing more." His answer didn't soothe her. It only deepened the unease settling into her chest. As weeks passed, the house that once felt luxurious began to change shape in her mind. The wide halls no longer felt grand. They felt isolating. The locked gates, once symbols of privacy, now seemed like barriers. The silence she initially admired now pressed against her ears until it felt suffocating. Every time she tried to step outside, one of the staff appeared almost immediately, polite but firm. reminding her that she needed permission or supervision. She felt watched without knowing where the eyes were. Even inside her bedroom, she couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. The turning point came one evening when she misplaced a sweater. She searched everywhere: closet, laundry room, chair backs, and finally asked a housemaid if she had seen it. The woman froze for a fraction of a second, her face tightening before she forced a smile and said she'd look for it. But the tension in her voice didn't match the simplicity of the question. Later that night, the sweater appeared neatly folded on Edith's bed. She hadn't left her room that evening. No one had knocked. No footsteps had sounded in the hallway. A cold awareness washed over her. Someone had entered without announcing themselves, without waiting for permission. And if they could enter this quietly, they could do far more without her ever knowing. The more she tried to assert small freedoms, the tighter the boundaries became. Her phone was monitored. Her online presence vanished. Her outings required approval. Conversations with staff were limited to polite necessities. And each day, the mansion she once saw as a dream home felt more like a maze with invisible rules. She tried convincing herself that she was overthinking everything. That marriage required adjustment, that privacy came with a cost. But deep in her chest, the same wound that shaped her dreams began to signal danger in a way she could no longer ignore. One morning, she stood in the foyer watching the heavy front doors, their locks glinting in the light. The house was beautiful, magnificent, even. But beauty can disguise what it protects. And in that moment, Edith understood something she hadn't wanted to admit. She wasn't living in a sanctuary. She was living in a place designed to keep her exactly where she was. What she had believed was freedom had become a cage she didn't know how to escape. The shift happened quietly, almost without notice. At first, it came in small moments: delayed messages, missed calls, unanswered texts. Friends back in Hartwell Ridge didn't worry much at first. They assumed Edith was adjusting to married life, settling into her new routines, enjoying the comfort she had always longed for. People disappear into their relationships all the time, especially in the honeymoon phase. But as days turned into weeks, the silence stretched farther than anyone expected. Her closest friends kept checking their phones, expecting at least one cheerful update, but none came. Messages were marked as delivered, but never read. Calls rang endlessly before going to voicemail. Social media profiles that once showed glimpses of her days suddenly went still. It wasn't like Edith to disappear, not completely, not without explanation. Those who cared for her tried to reassure themselves. She's probably busy. She's adjusting to her new life. Maybe she just wants privacy. Those words were repeated often, as though saying them enough times would make them true. But silence has a way of unsettling the people who pay attention. One of the last posts Edith ever made before her accounts went quiet was a photo taken at a formal gathering. She was standing beside Dr. Larson, smiling for the camera. Her dress shimmered, her makeup immaculate, and her posture perfect. At first glance, she looked radiant, every inch the woman who had stepped into the life she always dreamed of. But when friends looked more closely, something in her eyes didn't match the elegance around her. The smile was there, but it didn't reach the spark she once carried. Instead, her expression seemed distant, as though the joy was posed rather than felt. A few friends noticed the tightness in her jaw, the way her body leaned slightly away instead of toward her husband. Still, they dismissed their concerns. After all, photographs can capture moments inaccurately. Lighting can create illusions. People can look tired. It didn't mean something was wrong. But for Edith, the moment frozen in that photo wasn't exhaustion. It was the beginning of her disconnection from the outside world. Meanwhile, back in Hartwell Ridge, Corbin tried to bury the ache that had taken root in his chest. He threw himself into work, spending long hours in his workshop sanding wood until the soft dust coated his hands. The rhythm of carving offered an escape, but even the comfort of familiar tools couldn't soothe the hollow feeling inside him. He avoided the places they used to visit together. He stopped walking near the river where he had planned to propose. He tried not to think about the future he once imagined with her. But small memories clung to him stubbornly, her laughter drifting through his house, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she always grabbed his sleeve when she was excited about something. He told himself she was happy somewhere else, building the life she believed would protect her from fear. He tried to find comfort in the thought that he had loved her enough to let her choose her own path, even if it didn't include him anymore. Yet sometimes, late at night, he felt a strange tug in his chest that he couldn't explain. A sense that something wasn't right, a feeling he couldn't shake no matter how hard he tried. For the people outside the estate, Edith's silence felt unusual. But for those inside the walls, her world was shrinking quickly. Her phone no longer connected her to friends. She barely recognized the device anymore. Her emails vanished without reply. When she asked to call someone back home, Dr. Larson always had a reason to postpone it. Too late in the evening, the signal is weak. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. Each attempt to reach out was met with a new hurdle, framed in gentle explanations that masked the growing control beneath them. She was told she needed rest, or that adjusting to a new life required focus. Don't worry about distractions, he would say, brushing off her concerns with a calm smile. Everything you need is right here. She wanted to believe him, but every time she thought about stepping outside the estate or reconnecting with her old life, the air around her felt heavy. She felt watched, guided, contained, not cherished. The quiet inside her home wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. People in town had no reason to suspect danger. They only knew what they saw, or what they assumed. A woman leaves for a life of luxury, and silence follows. They thought she was traveling, living in comfort, enjoying the fruits of her new marriage. When a few of her old co-workers mentioned the lack of updates, others shrugged it off. She traded small-town life for something bigger, they said. Maybe she doesn't want to look back. Even Corbin, who loved her deeply, convinced himself she was safe. He didn't think to question the silence. He didn't imagine anything beyond heartbreak. He certainly didn't imagine fear. But quiet can hide more than indifference. Sometimes it hides danger. And for Edith, every week of silence was another step toward the storm she didn't see coming. The morning began cold enough that the hikers could see their breath rising in front of them. They were experienced with the trail, two friends who often took early weekend hikes before the sun reached the valley. The forest was quiet, the ground stiff from the night's chill, and the branches above them trembled softly in the wind. Nothing felt unusual, nothing signaled what they were about to find. They continued along the dirt path until one of them paused, his eyes narrowing at something just off the trail. He stepped closer, brushing aside a few low branches, and froze. At first he thought it was a mannequin, the kind used for medical training or store displays. But the longer he stared, the more the truth settled over him like a weight he couldn't lift. He called his friend over with a voice tight and unsteady. Together they approached, the figure lying in the flattened grass. They saw long hair, pale skin, and clothing that appeared weathered by days in the open. The forest, which had moments earlier felt peaceful, now seemed unnaturally quiet, as if the world itself was holding still. The hikers backed away and immediately called for help. Their voices trembled as they relayed what they had found, as though speaking the details aloud made it too real. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her story, but they knew she had been there far too long. Within the hour, emergency responders arrived. They moved carefully, speaking in low voices, documenting what they saw. The scene required sensitivity, care, and a determination to understand what had happened. Nothing appeared like a simple accident. Nothing suggested she had wandered there on her own. When the authorities confirmed her identity later that day, the news spread quickly through Hartwell Ridge and beyond. Edith Cole, missing for weeks, uncontacted, untraceable, had been found miles away from any known path, left alone in a remote stretch of land where few people ever wandered. But the most disturbing detail was the condition she had been found in. Law enforcement released only limited information, withholding specifics out of respect and caution. What they did confirm left the entire region shaken. Edith had been found without her vital organs. The statement was short, clinical, and devastating. The implication was unmistakable. This was not the work of someone acting out of impulse, done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The silence that followed the announcement carried more fear than any rumor the town had ever heard. The investigation moved quickly, fueled by urgency and shock. Teams searched the surrounding area for signs of struggle, for tracks, for anything that might explain how she ended up there. They found almost nothing. The location had been chosen with precision, far enough from trails to avoid accidental discovery, yet close enough that someone familiar with the land would know exactly where to go. Her belongings were nowhere near the scene. No phone, no bag, no jewelry. Only her body remained, left behind after something far more calculated had taken place. Detectives reviewed missing persons reports and cross-checked them with her timeline. They compared the condition of the scene to known patterns of illegal medical activity, quiet extractions hidden behind lies and intimidation. Their suspicions grew with each detail they uncovered. The manner in which Edith had been found pointed unmistakably to a larger operation, one that required resources, connections, and access to medical expertise. It was not something an average person could carry out. The list of individuals capable of such a crime was short, very short. When investigators began tracing Edith's last known movements, the trail led straight back to the estate behind the stone walls. Staff interviews revealed inconsistencies. Some workers seemed frightened to speak, while others answered questions with rehearsed statements that felt polished and incomplete. The entire household operated with an unusual level of caution, as if every employee had been trained to avoid saying the wrong thing. One housemaid admitted, in a trembling voice, that Edith had been distressed in her final weeks. She described tense moments behind closed doors, arguments that escalated into silence, and nights when Edith walked the halls as if afraid to sleep. The maid's account hinted at something deeper, something she couldn't say openly without fear of consequences. Another staff member mentioned that days before Edith disappeared, a private medical team visited the estate. Their arrival hadn't been announced. They kept to the lower level of the house and left within hours. Dr. Larson ordered the staff to remain on the opposite side of the property during their visit. When asked what the purpose of the visit was, no one had a clear answer. Or perhaps they did, and simply couldn't share it. Each interview added another piece to a picture that grew more disturbing by the minute. Investigators also examined Dr. Laurel Larson Jr.'s professional background. At first glance, he appeared highly accomplished, trained, certified, respected in certain circles. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered financial activity that didn't match the public persona he cultivated. There were unexplainable bank transfers, equipment purchases that had no clear purpose, and travel records that aligned with locations known for underground medical activity. His private accounts revealed connections to people whose reputations were far from respectable. His estate contracts were vague, his staff turnover unusually high, and several former employees had left abruptly without giving notice. The evidence didn't point toward an impulsive crime committed in a moment of rage. It pointed toward a system, a coordinated effort, a man who operated behind a carefully constructed mask. And with Edith's disappearance, that mask appeared to be cracking. The most chilling moment came when investigators traced the last verifiable sighting of Edith before her disappearance. A staff member reported seeing her looking injured, unsteady, frightened, asking for medical attention. Instead of taking her to a hospital, Dr. Larson dismissed the concern. He allegedly told the staff she was being dramatic and that she needed rest, not treatment. Hours later, she vanished from the estate. When employees asked where she had gone, they were told she was traveling. No one saw her leave. No one heard a car. No one questioned the explanation. Until now. What happened after that moment remained unclear, but the outcome was undeniable. Edith had placed her trust in the wrong hands, hands that possessed knowledge, precision, and connections powerful enough to hide the truth, at least for a while. Her discovery in the forest shattered the illusion that she had simply run off, started fresh, or chosen silence. It revealed a reality far more horrific. Now, the only question left was how far this operation extended, and how deeply Dr. Larson was tied to it. The deeper investigators dug into Dr. Laurel Larson Jr.'s past, the more the image of a well-respected physician began to crumble. His achievements looked impressive from a distance: specialized medical training, prestigious research affiliations, and a reputation for handling complex procedures with finesse. But when investigators examined the details, inconsistencies stood out like fractures beneath polished glass. Documents that should have been easy to verify were either incomplete or recently updated. Licensing records showed gaps that didn't align with his timeline of employment. Research papers he claimed to have authored were connected to teams he had only briefly worked with, and even then, his name appeared under circumstances colleagues later described as unusual. Each discovery hinted that the story he had crafted about his professional life was less a biography and more construction. Carefully layered, selectively curated, and designed to impress without revealing what he wanted hidden. The more his background was examined, the more it felt like investigators were looking through a carefully built illusion. Financial analysis revealed the next layer of deception. Several accounts existed under variations of his name, each tied to sizable transfers that didn't match his documented income. These weren't the typical red flags of tax avoidance or minor secrecy. They were transfers routed through entities linked to medical supply chains that operated in regions known for unlawful organ activity. One account showed payments to companies that ordered specialized surgical tools. These tools weren't common household items, they were equipment meant for procedures requiring skill and precision. Some were portable, compact enough to be transported without drawing attention, but advanced enough to be used outside of a formal medical facility. Investigators traced shipments of these items to warehouses, stocks, and private distribution centers across multiple states. The paper trail formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Each location was connected to a network of anonymous buyers and shadowed suppliers who had no legitimate reason to acquire such equipment. Whoever Dr. Larson was in public, his private dealings told a far more troubling story. Interviews with his former co-workers painted a picture of a man who remained reserved, even in professional settings. He wasn't confrontational or overtly intimidating. He simply held a level of control that discouraged questions. His colleagues recalled moments when he excused himself to take calls in hallways, lowering his voice whenever anyone passed by. He often arrived early, stayed late, and carried a second phone he never left on a desk or counter. One nurse who worked with him briefly mentioned something that stayed with investigators. He had a way of watching people without looking like he was watching. You felt measured around him. She described the discomfort of being in a room with him for long periods, not because he acted improperly, but because there was an intensity beneath his calm that didn't fit the environment. Another former co-worker recalled a moment when a patient asked a question Larson didn't want to answer. The doctor smiled and reassured the patient, but as soon as they left the room, that smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. It was like flipping a switch, the co-worker said. I never forgot it. These recollections weren't proof on their own, but they added weight to the growing suspicion that Dr. Larson maintained two very different identities. Even more unsettling were the testimonies from the staff at his estate. Though nervous, several employees admitted to noticing strange deliveries over the past few months. Boxes arrived late at night, carried through side entrances by unfamiliar men who left before dawn. The packages were never opened in common areas. Instead, they disappeared into the lower level of the house, and he sealed off to everyone except Dr. Larson. When asked what they believed was in those boxes, the staff members exchanged looks that spoke louder than words. Some said they heard metallic clinks or unusual humming sounds from behind closed doors. Others reported the doctor spending long hours downstairs, emerging with a level of intensity that made them avoid eye contact. One maid, who had worked there the longest, hesitated before speaking. Her hands trembled as she recounted days when Edith appeared fragile, her movements slow and unsteady. She remembered the look in Edith's eyes, something between fear and exhaustion. She also remembered how the doctor dismissed any concern, insisting everything was handled. When investigators asked what handled meant, the maid looked down at her hands and said quietly, it meant don't ask questions. Travel records uncovered another troubling pattern. Dr. Larson made frequent trips to countries with documented issues related to illegal organ operations. He traveled alone, never bringing his wife, and often stayed in places where he had no professional ties. His return dates aligned suspiciously with increased activity in his private accounts. Even his passport showed stamps from regions where medical oversight was notoriously weak, places where underground procedures could occur unnoticed. When investigators compared these trips with his public schedule, they found several discrepancies. He told colleagues he was attending conferences. Records from those events showed no sign of him ever appearing. Each red flag pointed toward deliberate secrecy, not coincidence. When investigators tried to contact people listed as his professional references, they were met with vague answers or sudden unwillingness to speak. Some numbers were disconnected. Others belonged to individuals who claimed only brief interactions with him. One number traced back to a foreign entity that refused to comment altogether. This was no longer a case of a doctor with a few unusual habits. This was a man whose entire background was stitched together from half-truths, omissions, and misleading claims. A man who operated behind layers of distance and caution. A man whose connections extended far beyond what anyone in Hartwell Ridge could have imagined. What chilled investigators most was the consistency in every account, every document, and every clue. Nothing about Dr. Larson appeared accidental. Everything about him was meticulously crafted, from the persona he showed the world to the network he built in the shadows. He didn't simply happen upon opportunity. He created it. He structured his life in a way that hid the truth behind controlled appearances. Behind the refined smile and flawless reputation was someone who understood human vulnerability and used it to his advantage. Someone who knew how to isolate, manipulate, and execute plans without leaving obvious traces. Someone who treated trust as a tool and people as resources. Edith wasn't his first connection to fear. She was simply the one who never escaped it. When investigators completed their initial analysis, one conclusion stood clear. They weren't dealing with a man who had slipped into wrongdoing. They were dealing with someone who had been operating like this for a long time. And the horrifying truth was that he might not have worked alone. The investigation into Edith's final weeks began with the simple question, when did the fear begin? To answer that, detectives reconstructed every known moment from the day she entered the estate until the day she vanished. What they uncovered revealed a pattern of control so gradual and precise that it was almost invisible until it was too late. The first week seemed benign. She moved into the estate, learned the layout of her new home, and tried to adjust to the unfamiliar routines. The early days carried an air of hope, an attempt to settle into a life she believed would shield her from the insecurities of her childhood. She explored the halls, decorated her room, and tried to silence the faint discomfort she felt whenever staff looked at her too quickly or too cautiously. She told herself everything would make sense once she settled in, but the clock had already started ticking. By the second week, Edith's unease grew. Staff members avoided speaking to her, offering only short, polite replies to even the simplest questions. The few who seemed willing to chat lowered their voices whenever they noticed Dr. Larson nearby. Workers moved through the house as if guided by invisible boundaries, never lingering, never relaxing, always carrying a quiet urgency. One evening, she attempted to confide in a housemaid about feeling overwhelmed in the new environment. The maid stiffened immediately, as though Edith had said something dangerous. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway before she whispered, "It's better if you keep your head down here." Before Edith could ask what that meant, the maid excused herself and disappeared. The warning stayed with her long after the woman was gone. That was the moment Edith first felt true fear, an instinctive sense that something wasn't right. It was faint, but it grew stronger every day. Tension escalated during the third week. Staff reported hearing raised voices from the private bedroom wing, muffled arguments between the couple that carried through the walls. They never heard the exact words, but they recognized the tone, strain, frustration, something sharp. The arguments always ended abruptly, followed by a heavy silence. One night, after a particularly heated exchange, Edith walked through the hallway with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes distant and unfocused. A housekeeper saw her and hesitated, wanting to ask if she was all right, but the look on Edith's face, one of quiet dread, made her step back. The next morning, Edith appeared withdrawn, her interactions minimal, her responses clipped. She spent more time alone, wandering the property like someone searching for a thought she couldn't catch. Whatever had been said behind those closed doors had left a mark on her, a small crack in the image of the life she thought she had stepped into. By the fourth week, the situation had worsened. The staff later revealed that Edith attempted to make a private phone call from an area of the house rarely occupied. She spoke in a low, urgent voice, glancing over her shoulder repeatedly. She didn't get far. A staff member heard footsteps, fast, controlled, and moments later the doctor entered the room. The tone of his voice wasn't raised, but it was sharp enough that even the employee listening from down the hall felt the tension. Edith's voice dropped instantly. The conversation ended. Her attempts to reach the outside world had failed. After that incident, staff noticed she rarely had access to a phone at all. It was either left charging in odd places or accidentally misplaced. When one employee tried to retrieve it for her, the doctor intervened before she could hand it over. From that point forward, Edith's lifeline to the outside world had been effectively severed. By week 5, Edith wasn't allowed off the property without her husband. This rule was not announced. It simply became a fact of her life. When she asked about leaving to visit nearby shops or take a walk beyond the gates, she was told it wasn't safe. People in my position attract attention, the doctor explained. I need to protect you. His voice was gentle, his reasoning smooth, and while it sounded caring on the surface, everything about it felt wrong. Days grew longer. Rooms grew quieter. The gates seemed taller. One of the groundskeepers remembered seeing Edith staring at the metal bars early one morning, gripping them with white-knuckled fear before stepping away quickly when she realized she wasn't alone. Whatever she felt in that moment was something she clearly could not say aloud. By week 6, the signs of physical distress appeared. Staff members recalled seeing her walk gingerly, one hand pressed against her side. Her posture changed, slower, cautious, as though she was trying not to aggravate something. When a maid asked gently if she needed a doctor, Edith opened her mouth as if to answer, but before she could speak, Dr. Larson appeared behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She's fine, he said with an easy smile. Just tired. No need to worry. Edith said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The maid later admitted she regretted not insisting on helping her, but the atmosphere in the house made everyone hesitant to step outside the boundaries the doctor established. Their fear of losing their jobs, or something more, kept them quiet. The mansion, once full of quiet routines, now carried the weight of secrets hidden behind every closed door. By week 7, the unusual activity escalated. A private medical team arrived at the estate in 2 unmarked vans. They came late in the afternoon and left before nightfall. They passed through the house, carrying cases that looked heavy and secure. The staff were ordered to remain in their quarters until the team was gone. No one saw Edith during their visit. No one knew whether she was hidden, sedated, scared, or pleading. The secrecy surrounding the visit unsettled even the most composed employees. It didn't feel like a routine medical check. It didn't feel like a wellness visit. It felt like something planned, something prepared, something silent. And after that day, Edith was never seen in the house again. The 8th week brought lies, a sudden announcement that Edith had left for international travel. Staff were told she needed time to herself or space to recover from stress. The explanations varied depending on who asked, but the underlying message was always the same: don't question it. Yet no one saw her leave. No luggage left her room. No car came for her. No goodbyes were said. It was as if she simply vanished into thin air. When a few staff members expressed confusion, the doctor reassured them with polished answers and a calm that made questioning him feel unreasonable. But behind closed doors, whispers began. Some believed she was sick. Others believed she was being hidden. A few feared something far worse. Those fears proved right. On the 12th week, though weak hikers found her in the forest, the timeline snapped into clarity. Every small detail, every moment of fear, every unexplained event took on a new shape. Week 1, she tried to adjust. Week 2, she sensed something was wrong. Week 3, arguments began. Week 4, a secret call was intercepted. Week 5, freedom disappeared. Week 6, she showed signs of injury. Week 7, a medical team arrived. Week 8, she traveled, according to the staff. Week 12, her body was found far from the estate. The entire pattern suggested not chaos, but planning. Planning carried out by someone with medical knowledge, financial resources, and the ability to manipulate those around him. And every arrow pointed to the same name, the same man, the same husband she had trusted with her life. Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. news travels quickly in a place like Hartwell Ridge, especially when it's the kind of news people pray they never hear. When word reached the town that Edith Cole had been found, the information arrived in fragments, quiet whispers, uncertain retellings, and a confusion so heavy it left people stunned. Most waited for confirmation, hoping desperately that the rumors were wrong. Corbin Hale wasn't part of the murmuring crowd. He was at home, sanding a piece of cedar for a client, when a soft knock sounded at his door. He didn't think much of it. He wiped his hands on a rag and opened the door, expecting a neighbor or customer. Instead, he saw the sheriff, standing with a solemn expression that drained the world of all color. "Corbin," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Corbin didn't remember walking to the table or sitting down. He didn't remember the sheriff's exact words. All he remembered was the moment the truth reached him, the moment he learned Edith was gone, not building a new life somewhere far away. Gone. His breath caught in his throat as the sheriff explained what happened. Corbin listened, gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Each word lodged itself deep inside him, heavy and merciless. When the sheriff confirmed that Edith had been found without the organs that once kept her alive, Corbin felt something inside him break, a quiet, painful fracture that spread through his chest like ice. The sheriff spoke gently, apologized for the pain, and promised justice. But Corbin barely heard him. His mind had filled with images he didn't want to see. Edith alone in the cold, afraid, wishing for help that never came. He had loved her, he had lost her, and now he knew she had suffered in ways he could barely comprehend. Later that night, long after the sheriff left, Corbin sat at the table with the note Edith wrote him months earlier. He unfolded it slowly, even though he had memorized the words, "I need a different life." At the time, those words felt like a knife to the heart. Now they carried a different weight, one filled with sorrow rather than rejection. He wondered if she ever regretted writing it, if she ever wished she could undo that moment, if she realized, even for a second, how deeply he still cared for her. It hurt to think about, yet he couldn't stop. Every memory felt sharper now. The way she laughed when he teased her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way she looked at him when she believed in the future they once imagined together. He remembered those nights when they talked about dreams too big for their small town. He remembered her saying she wanted safety, a life without fear. He remembered how he promised to stand by her no matter what. But promises couldn't compete with the shadows she could never fully explain, and he never knew how heavy those shadows were until now. Investigators later contacted him, hoping he could offer insight into her fears, hopes, or insecurities. Corbin agreed immediately. He sat with them for hours, recounting every detail he could. A gesture, a comment, a moment from their shared past that might help them understand who Edith was beneath her choices. He didn't speak with bitterness. There was no anger toward her, no resentment for the way she left, only sorrow, deep, aching sorrow. He told them she wasn't selfish or calculating. She was scared, terrified that life would corner her the way it cornered her parents, terrified of living without stability, terrified that love alone wouldn't be enough to protect her. She just wanted to feel safe, Corbin said quietly. She wasn't chasing luxury. She was running from fear. One of the investigators nodded, recognizing the truth in his voice. Edith wasn't the type to crave excess. What she wanted was something far simpler, a life where she didn't have to worry about losing everything. Corbin wished she had understood that she never needed wealth to be safe. She only needed someone who cared. But fear has a way of distorting what is real and magnifying what is uncertain, and Edith's fears were louder than his reassurances. In the days that followed, Corbin found himself wandering through the places that once held their happiest memories. He walked along the riverbank where he planned to propose. He sat on the bench outside the bakery where he used to meet her after work. He passed the old oak tree where they carved their initials, wondering if he should sand the markings down or let them stand as a reminder of who she once was. He chose to leave them. Some memories deserved to remain untouched. When people from the town approached him, unsure of what to say, he simply nodded and thanked them. He didn't want pity. He didn't want attention. He wanted answers, ones he knew he would never fully receive. But he also wanted peace, not for himself, but for Edith. He hoped that wherever her final moments took her, she knew that someone in this world had loved her without conditions, without expectations, without judgment. Someone who cared for her even when she made choices that hurt him. Her fate was something no one deserved, not even someone who made painful decisions. Corbin understood that more than anyone. On the evening after the memorial announcement, he lit a single candle outside his workshop and let it burn as long as it could. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply watched the flame flicker in the breeze, imagining that somewhere, in some way, Edith could see it. A small light in the darkness. A reminder that she was not forgotten. A symbol of the love that hadn't disappeared, even after everything. Her story would follow him for the rest of his life, not as a wound, but as a lesson carved deep into his heart. Love can't save someone who doesn't feel safe, and safety isn't found in wealth, it's found in trust, honesty, and kindness. Edith never discovered that truth, but Corbin would carry it for both of them. News of Ethicol's death struck Hartwell Ridge with the force of a sudden winter storm, quiet at first, then overwhelming. Word passed from neighbor to neighbor, whispered across shop counters, spoken in hushed tones outside the post office. People repeated her name with disbelief, shaking their heads as if the truth simply couldn't belong to someone they knew so well. Hartwell Ridge was a close-knit place. Loss didn't feel distant here. It pressed against the heart of every person who had watched Edith grow up. They remembered her as the bright-eyed girl who helped her mother carry groceries, the teenager who worked extra hours at the bakery during holidays, the young woman who always greeted people with warmth even when life weighed on her shoulders. Learning what happened to her didn't just bring grief. It brought a kind of fear the town wasn't used to feeling. They wondered how someone from their community, someone who once walked their streets and laughed with their children, could meet an end so cruel, so calculated, so far removed from the safety they assumed their valley provided. For days, the town felt suspended. Conversations stopped whenever someone mentioned her name. Stores played music at a lower volume. Parents held their children a little closer at night. People who hadn't prayed in years lit candles in quiet corners of their homes. Edith's absence felt like a fracture running through the entire community. The bakery where she once worked placed a small table near the front window. On it, they set a framed photo of her, a candid shot taken by a coworker during a holiday shift. She wasn't posing. She was laughing, flour dusting her cheek, eyes bright with genuine joy. Customers who came in for their morning pastries slowed as they passed the table, pausing for a moment before moving on. Some left flowers. Others wrote notes and slipped them beneath the frame. The owners tried to keep the business running as usual, but the familiar rhythm of their days had changed. Every corner of the shop felt touched by her absence. One of the employees admitted that for a split second on her first morning back, she expected Edith to walk in with her apron bundled in her hands, ready to begin the early shift. When the door remained still, the memory struck her harder than she expected. Across town, the local church hosted a small gathering. The pastor opened the building for anyone who needed a space to sit, think, or pray. People came in quietly, many carrying candles, some wiping away tears they weren't prepared to shed. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Shared grief filled the room without a single word. When the community organized a memorial, nearly the entire town showed up. It took place near the old wooden bridge Edith used to walk across after her shifts. Lanterns hung along the railings, swaying gently in the wind as dusk settled over the valley. Families brought flowers, laying them along the boards in a line that grew longer as the evening went on. Someone placed a small wooden heart carved by Corbin years earlier, something he had once given her as a simple gesture of affection. He didn't announce himself. He simply set it down and stepped back, blending quietly into the crowd. A few people noticed him but offered space instead of questions. The pastor spoke softly, choosing his words with care. He didn't try to explain the cruelty of what happened. No words could justify or soften it. Instead, he talked about her life, her kindness, her dreams, her laughter. He reminded the town that Edith was more than the tragedy she endured. She was part of the fabric of their community, someone whose presence had touched many lives even if she never knew it. People cried, not just for her death, but for the thought of how much she must have feared in her final days. They cried for the choices she made out of longing, for the fears she carried from childhood, for the trust she placed in someone who didn't deserve it. They cried because her story forced them to confront a truth no one wanted to face. Sometimes danger doesn't arrive with warning signs. Sometimes it arrives with charm, wealth, and promises that feel safe. In the weeks that followed, Edith's story became a cautionary tale whispered to the younger generation. Parents told their daughters to value character over status. Teachers reminded students to speak up when something doesn't feel right. Older residents, who rarely discussed such matters, found themselves warning others that trust should never be given blindly. Hartwell Ridge had always been a place where people believed their neighbors were good, and the world outside was the one filled with risk. But Edith's fate shattered that assumption. It taught them that danger can hide behind a polished smile, that manipulation can disguise itself as protection, and that the pursuit of a better life can sometimes lead into the darkest corners. For many, the grief didn't fade quickly. It settled quietly into their routines, reminding them of the fragility of safety. But in that grief, the town also found unity. They supported one another in ways big and small, dropping off meals, offering rides, checking on those who seemed weighed down by sorrow. Edith had left the valley physically, but the impact of her story stayed. Late at night, when the lanterns from the memorial had long since been taken down, people still walked across that old bridge. They paused at the spot where flowers once rested, remembering the girl who used to stand there watching the river flow beneath her. Some whispered her name, some prayed, some simply stood in silence. Hartwell Ridge may have been a quiet place, but in the wake of her loss, its heart beat with a determination it had never known before, to honor her memory, to protect its own, and to never forget how her story changed them. Edith Cole would not be remembered for the way her life ended, but for the life she lived, and for the lesson she left behind, etched into the soul of a town that loved her more than she ever realized. When authorities issued an alert for Dr. Laurel Larson Jr., they expected progress within days. Men like him, highly educated, easily recognizable, tied to documented criminal activity, usually left a trail impossible to conceal. But the moment the investigation intensified, it became clear that Dr. Larson had been preparing for this outcome long before Edith ever vanished. By the time officers reached his estate with a warrant, the house had already been abandoned. Drawers were empty, personal belongings gone, and electronic devices wiped clean. Even the rooms that once held medical equipment were stripped of anything that could be used as evidence. The only thing left behind was the silence of a place that had seen far more than it ever revealed. It didn't feel like the hurried departure of someone caught off guard. It felt like the final step of a plan executed with precision. Within hours, authorities confirmed what they feared. The doctor had vanished. His disappearance set off a nationwide search. Investigators combed through airports, train stations, and border checkpoints, looking for any trace of his last movements. But he was nowhere. No flight records, no tickets, no surveillance footage. It was as if he had walked off the map. Financial analysts examined his accounts again, hoping to track recent activity, but his funds had been emptied or rerouted through channels too layered to follow. Several accounts under shell companies went dark at the same exact time, indicating that he wasn't acting alone. Someone with skill and resources had helped him disappear. One investigator put it bluntly, he didn't run, he relocated. Reports began to surface from residents in nearby counties who claimed to have seen someone resembling him in their areas. But each sighting led to a dead end. A man fitting his description boarding a bus, a figure wearing similar clothing entering a hotel, a stranger with his features driving through a toll gate. None of them panned out. It became clear that Dr. Larson knew exactly how to blend in when he wanted to. The polished appearance he once used to stand out could be stripped away in minutes, replaced by a disguise ordinary enough to avoid attention. As they widened their search, investigators uncovered alarming evidence about the doctor's connections. His travel records suggested he had contacts overseas who operated in the shadows, individuals capable of arranging transport, shelter, and protection. Some locations he'd visited were known for providing false documents to those who could afford them. Authorities suspected he had access to multiple identities, passports in other names, medical certifications forged with expertise. His ability to pass as a legitimate professional in various places suggested he could slip into new roles with ease. One forensic specialist commented during a briefing, "This man didn't just prepare to run, he built an escape route years before he needed one." That realization chilled everyone involved. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of the story, turning Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. into a national subject of fascination and fear. News stations ran his image daily, his calm smile, clean-cut appearance, and unassuming posture. Commentators discussed the contradictions in his life, how a man trained to save lives could be involved in something so monstrous. People across the country debated how someone could maintain two faces so seamlessly. One neighbor described him as the type of man you'd trust to watch your kids for 10 minutes. Another, after learning the truth, admitted that his manner had always felt too calm, as though something important was missing behind his eyes. But calm or not, He was gone, and the longer he remained missing, the more unsettling the unanswered questions became. Did he flee alone? Was someone helping him? Did he intend to continue his activities elsewhere, or was he already doing so? No one had answers, only suspicions. Leads emerged on occasion, tips from people convinced they recognized him in distant states or even other countries. One caller reported seeing a man who looked like him walking through a crowded street market in Central America. Another claimed he checked into a hotel under a different name in Eastern Europe. Each tip sparked immediate response from local authorities, but none produced results. It became clear that Dr. Larson was skilled at staying one step ahead. Every time investigators thought they had found a thread to follow, it slipped away. His disappearance stretched from days to weeks, then months, then years. And just like that, the trail grew cold. The worst part wasn't that he vanished. It was that he might still be out there, living quietly behind another identity, walking down streets where no one knew his history, possibly continuing the work he'd begun long before Edith Cole ever met him. In Hartwell Ridge, the townspeople followed the case updates closely. Each failed lead deepened their fear that justice might never catch up to the man responsible for Edith's death. Parents who once trusted the world outside their homes now locked their doors earlier, checked in on neighbors more often, and warned each other about unfamiliar cars. Corbin tried not to follow every update, but he couldn't help it. Each news report felt like reopening a wound that hadn't healed. He wanted closure, not out of revenge, but because Edith deserved answers. He wanted the world to know what had been taken from her. The idea of Dr. Larson walking free, breathing, planning, moving from place to place, gnawed at him in ways he couldn't express. Yet he carried his grief quietly, letting it settle instead of letting it harden into rage. Rage wouldn't bring Edith back. Rage wouldn't change the truth. It would only swallow him whole. So he waited and watched, hoping for a day when someone, somewhere, would finally recognize the man who had caused so much destruction. Investigators, too, refused to close the case. Files remained open. Alerts remained active. Analysts continued to monitor suspicious activity that might trace back to his old financial patterns. Every so often, a faint lead surfaced, sparking renewed effort. Even without certainty, one conclusion echoed through every briefing. Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. had not disappeared because he was afraid. He disappeared because he knew exactly how to. And until he was found, the possibility lingered that he remained connected to networks larger and more dangerous than anyone had initially imagined. Some believed he assumed a new identity abroad. Some believed he lived quietly, trying not to attract attention. Others feared he continued operating behind the same mask of respectability he once wore so convincingly. But the truth, wherever it was, whoever he had become, remained out of reach. What investigators knew for certain was this: Edith's story was not an isolated tragedy. It was part of something far larger, something her death had only begun to expose. In the aftermath of the investigation, long after officers left the estate and reporters stopped visiting Hartwell Ridge, the story of Edith Cole settled into a quieter space, one that stretched beyond the crime itself. Her life and tragic end became more than a headline or a cautionary whisper. They became a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths about fear, trust, and the choices people make when they feel cornered by their past. People began to ask not just how her life ended, but why she made the choices that led her into danger. The answer wasn't simple. It was layered, shaped by years of insecurity and hope, shaped by wounds no one saw but which guided her steps more powerfully than she ever realized. Edith's story became a lesson that reached farther than her hometown. It spoke to anyone who ever feared the life they were born into, anyone who felt trapped by money troubles, anyone who believed security could be purchased if they found the right partner. This wasn't just about a doctor who misused trust. It was about understanding how desperation can cloud judgment, how charm can hide harmful intentions, how easily someone longing for safety can mistake control for love. The first lesson people drew from her life was the danger of valuing wealth over character. Edith never intended to chase luxury for luxury's sake. She wanted stability, something she never truly had growing up. But in chasing stability, she overlooked the qualities that matter more than any material comfort: honesty, kindness, accountability. In the early days of their relationship, Dr. Larson presented himself as a protector. He spoke calmly. He offered her a vision of a future where fear had no place. He gave her a life that appeared comfortable, polished, and free from the worries she'd carried since childhood. It felt like everything she wanted. But appearance can be a mask, and security built on someone else's control is not real safety. Edith's story reminded people that wealth is not a shield, it's only a surface. True protection comes from trust, not possessions. From genuine care, not grand promises. Another lesson came from the way Dr. Larson used isolation as a tool. Early in their marriage, his restrictions seemed mild, small boundaries disguised as concern. He made her believe that staying close protected her, that reducing contact with others was necessary, that adjustments were part of marriage, but control often begins quietly. It rarely starts with a threat. It starts with undermining independence, limiting communication, cutting off connections one step at a time. The people of Hartwell Ridge realized how easy it is to confuse control with devotion when someone is skilled at disguising their motives. Edith wanted to trust her husband. She wanted to believe he knew what was best, but each restriction was a brick in the prison he built around her. Her silence in the final weeks taught a lesson many found chilling. Losing your voice doesn't always happen through violence. Sometimes it happens through gradual surrender, shaped by fear, subtle manipulation, and emotional pressure. Edith's tragedy also exposed another truth often overlooked. Those who cause harm are not always the people we expect. Dr. Larson didn't look like a criminal. He wasn't loud, aggressive, or obviously dangerous. He was polished, calm, and well-spoken. People trusted him because he carried himself like someone who belonged to a respectable world. But titles, degrees, and wealth don't determine integrity. Some of the most dangerous individuals are the ones who know how to hide behind a perfect image. This realization unsettled people far beyond Hartwell Ridge. It forced them to reconsider assumptions about who can be trusted and who might be capable of things no one wants to imagine. Edith's story became a reminder that danger can wear a smile, shake your hand, and speak with soft charm. It doesn't always look like something to fear. The fourth lesson came from the reality of how vulnerable people can be when they carry unresolved wounds. Edith hadn't healed from the financial struggles of her childhood. Those fears never left her. They guided her decisions more than she realized. She wasn't trying to escape love. She was trying to escape fear. Fear of not having enough. Fear of repeating her parents' hardships. Fear of being trapped in a life that felt one misstep away from collapsing. People in town began to recognize how past hurts can shape choices, even when the future looks bright. They began to talk openly about the importance of addressing fears before they harden into decisions that lead down dangerous roads. Edith's hopes weren't wrong. Her dreams weren't wrong. But fear drove her towards someone who promised relief instead of someone who offered genuine care. Another lesson emerged from the crime itself, one that many found difficult to accept. Organ trafficking wasn't something they believed could reach their lives. It wasn't something they discussed or imagined. It felt like a distant crime, something belonging to far-off places or dramatic movies, not real life. But Edith's story shattered that illusion. It reminded the world that hidden networks exist, fueled by people who prey on vulnerability and opportunity. These crimes are carried out quietly, with planning and coordination by individuals who know how to blend into the everyday world. Her case forced people to stay alert, to recognize that danger isn't always distant. It can be closer than anyone realizes. Finally, the most heartbreaking lesson of all came from the way Edith trusted the wrong person with her future. She believed Dr. Larson's love would protect her. She believed his wealth offered safety. She believed stepping into his life would free her from the fears that haunted her. But safety built on someone else's control is never real safety. Love that limits freedom is not love. Promises made to hide manipulation are not promises at all. Edith learned these truths too late, but through her story, others began to understand them more clearly. Hartwell Ridge carried her memory not as a warning born of fear, but as a guide, teaching that real protection comes from respect, honesty, and shared strength, not from the allure of power or possessions. People said her name with both sorrow and purpose. Her life became a reminder to trust carefully, to question when something feels wrong, and to listen to the quiet voice inside that senses danger long before words can describe it. She wanted safety. She deserved safety. And though her story ended in tragedy, her legacy became a message that reached far beyond the valley she once called home. Years passed before Corbin Hale found the strength to revisit the old footpath that led to Edith's memorial. The seasons had changed countless times since her death. Summers warming the valley, autumns leaving gold across the hills, winters laying quiet snow over the bridge where the town once gathered to honor her. Life in Hartwell Ridge had moved on in small, subtle ways, but Edith's memory lived on in the places she once touched. Corbin had rebuilt his life slowly, piece by piece, not because he wanted to forget her, but because he knew he couldn't stay frozen in the grief that once consumed him. He worked long hours, took on new projects, and let his hands stay busy with the kind of work that kept his thoughts from sinking too deep. He met someone kind, someone patient, someone who understood that loving him meant living alongside memories he could never fully let go of. He eventually married again, quietly, without much ceremony. In time, he became a father. Holding his child for the first time brought a shift inside him, a gentle unfurling of warmth he thought had been permanently buried. Life had offered him something new, something healing, something steady. But even with that blessing, a small part of him remained tied to the girl he once loved in the quiet valley of their youth. On the anniversary of her passing, Corbin made his way toward the memorial plaque placed near the old wooden bridge. The path felt familiar beneath his steps, the gravel crunching softly as he walked through the cool morning air. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind Edith used to pick on warm afternoons, and approached the simple metal marker bearing her name. The plaque was modest, polished only by the weather and the hands of those who visited over the years. Someone had left fresh candles nearby. Someone else had placed a folded note. Her memory clearly continued to echo through the town. Corbin stood there quietly, letting the silence settle around him. He didn't speak at first. He simply took in the view of the river below, moving steadily between the rocks just as it had when he and Edith walked this same path together. Time had changed many things, but the water remained the same, soft in its rhythm, constant in its flow. He knelt and placed the flowers at the base of the plaque. For a long moment, he just breathed. He didn't come to the memorial out of obligation. He didn't come out of guilt. He came because a part of his heart would always belong to the girl who once dreamed of a bigger world, the girl who loved deeply but feared deeply too. He came to honor her, not as the woman caught in a nightmare she never deserved, but as the young woman he once held close. "Hey, Edith," he whispered softly, feeling the words catch slightly in his throat. "I'm doing all right. I hope you know that." He told her about his life, not in detail, but enough to share that he had found peace, that he had love in his life, again, that he had learned to breathe without the weight he carried for so long. He spoke quietly, knowing the words were more for him than for her, but believing somewhere in the quiet morning that she would have wanted to hear them. His voice held no bitterness, no anger, only a sadness that time had softened, transforming into something gentler, something closer to acceptance. Corbin often wondered how different Edith's life might have been if fear had not shaped her choices, if she had believed she deserved love without condition, if she had understood that safety wasn't measured in wealth, but in the honesty shared between two people, if she had known that the life she feared most, one built on simplicity, could have been the one that kept her whole. But wondering couldn't change the past, and Corbin had learned not to stay trapped in what-ifs. Instead, he chose to carry her memory as a reminder, to himself, to his community, and one day to his child. A reminder that choices matter, that people can lose themselves chasing protection in all the wrong places, that trust must be given carefully, and that love should never demand silence or fear. Edith's life taught him more than he ever expected. Her loss taught him even more. He rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands, and stood facing the flowing river. The breeze carried the scent of pine and cool earth, stirring memories that were no longer painful, only poignant. He allowed himself a final moment, one filled with gratitude, for the time they shared, for the lessons he learned, for the way her story shaped him into a man who valued depth over appearance, truth over comfort. "I forgive you," he said quietly, not because she had wronged him intentionally, but because forgiveness was a bridge between past and present. A way to free his heart while still honoring hers. He slipped his hands into his pockets and took a step back from the plaque. The wildflowers swayed gently in the morning wind, a soft splash of color against the weathered wood of the bridge. Corbin turned and began walking back toward the path. Each step felt lighter than the last. He didn't leave the memory of Edith behind. He carried it with him, peacefully, respectfully, and without pain. And somewhere in the quiet of Hartwell Ridge, the story of Edith Cole continued to live on, not as a tragedy alone, but as a reminder of the fragile line between fear and trust, between hope and danger, between the life someone longs for and the one that ultimately chooses them. In the quiet valley of Hartwell Ridge, where life once felt gentle and predictable, Edith Cole believed she had finally found the path that would shield her from every fear she carried. She dreamed of comfort, stability, and a future untouched by the struggles of her childhood. But the path she chose led her into the hands of a man who understood all too well how to disguise danger beneath charm, wealth, and the promise of protection. Dr. Laurel Larson Jr. presented himself as a savior, calm, attentive, impossibly refined. But beneath that polished exterior lived someone willing to use knowledge as a weapon, money as a shield, and trust as an entryway into the lives of the vulnerable. Edith never saw the danger coming. Few people would have. Her final days revealed the devastating truth that not every threat announces itself with violence. Some threats smile, offer comfort, and slowly take away the freedoms that make us feel human. Her life was not taken by a moment of rage, but by a series of choices built on control, secrecy, and manipulation. Choices made by a man who slipped into the shadows before the world could hold him accountable. Edith's story forces us to confront the difficult reality that danger can exist where we least expect it. It reminds us that trust should be earned, not assumed, that promises are not guarantees, that love should never silence who we are. But her story is more than a warning about one man's wrongdoing. It is a reminder of the countless people who long for safety but don't always know where to find it. People who believe choosing stability means choosing protection, even when the cost becomes their freedom. Edith wanted security, not excess. She wanted reassurance, not control. And in her search for those things, she crossed into a world she didn't recognize until it was too late. Her dreams were never the problem. Her fear was never the problem. The problem was the man who exploited both. Today, Hartwell Ridge remembers her not for the way her life ended, but for the lessons she left behind. Her story encourages others to listen to their instincts, trust their discomfort, and step back when something feels wrong, even if the wrong thing wears a refined smile and speaks in a calm voice. As long as her memory lives on, her message remains. Safety is not built from wealth or grand promises. Safety comes from honesty, compassion, and freedom. Anything else is an illusion. Thank you for joining me in today's story. If Edith's journey moved you, or if you believe stories like this help keep others aware and informed, please remember to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another true American story. Until next time, take care of yourselves, trust your instincts, and stay safe.